Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet corner of the universe where thought meets wonder, and science becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into a mystery that has followed every heartbeat that ever lived, the great question of what happens when we die. Not as something to fear, but as something to understand gently. Before we begin, if you find comfort in these quiet explorations, feel free to like this video and subscribe, only if it feels right for you. And when you're ready, I'd love for you to share where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I always find it beautiful how we gather across time zones, each of us drifting in our own slice of night. Now take a moment to settle in, dim the lights, let the day loosen its grip. Maybe there's a soft hum in the room, a fan, a faraway car, the rhythm of your breath. Let it all become part of the background. We're about to drift into one of humanity's oldest maps of consciousness, a map not drawn with ink and paper, but with awareness itself. Tonight, we open the pages of the Bardo Thödol, known to many as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It is said to describe, step by step, the journey of consciousness after death. But it is also much more than that. It's a guide for how to live, how to let go, and how to awaken to the clear light that shines within all things. So if your mind begins to wander as we go, let it. You'll still be carried by the story. Because in the stillness between words, in that faint echo of your own awareness, something timeless is already listening, and now our quiet exploration begins. Imagine this. One day, perhaps a day far from now, the breath leaves the body, the heart falls silent, the eyes once so full of light soften into stillness. For thousands of years, people across the world have wondered, what happens next? Does everything simply fade to black? Or does the mind continue, untethered, like a spark escaping from its lamp? Science has mapped the body with extraordinary precision. It can trace the final flicker of neurons, the fading pulse of brain waves, the slowing of cells. Yet even as we measure death to the millisecond, the question of consciousness remains, ungraspable, like mist between fingers. The truth is, for all our instruments, we do not know where awareness goes when the body grows quiet. The ancient Tibetans dared to imagine that consciousness does not stop. Instead, it shifts, it travels, it passes through a sequence of inner landscapes that mirror the mind's own depth. The Bardo Thödol, which means liberation through hearing, was written to guide that passage. It's read aloud beside the dying, not to comfort the body, but to awaken the mind as it loosens from matter. But there's something even more remarkable about this text. It isn't meant only for the dying, it's a book for the living. A reminder that every moment, even now, we move through our own smaller bardos, between waking and sleeping, between breath and breath, between who we were and who we are becoming. In the still language of the Tibetan masters, a bardo is simply an in-between. It can last a heartbeat or a lifetime. It can happen at death or in a single quiet moment of change. We live inside bardos constantly, small transitions that echo the great one that will come at the end. Think about the moments when time seems to slow, a deep breath before a decision, the silence after hearing unexpected news, the stillness when the sun slips behind the horizon. Each is a doorway, a pause between what was and what will be. In those pauses, awareness reveals itself, clear, bright, and timeless. Modern science, in its own way, has begun to brush against the same mystery. People who have come back from the edge of death often describe experiences so vivid they seem to defy biology. They speak of a radiant light, brighter than anything they've known, yet soft and embracing. Some describe hearing gentle voices or feeling a boundless peace, a dissolving of fear, a sense of unity. These are not proofs, but patterns, echoes of what the Bardo Thödol has whispered for centuries. The Tibetan masters believe that death is not the destruction of consciousness, but a transformation of its focus. Just as the mind shifts when we fall asleep, leaving one reality to enter another, so does it shift at death, passing through inner realms created by its own nature. If you think of awareness as light, then death is not the extinguishing of the flame, but the removal of the lamp's shade. What remains is the pure radiance of mind, itself, the clear light. But the text also warns this moment is fleeting. Recognition of the light can bring immediate liberation. Failure to recognize it leads the consciousness deeper into illusion, where fear and desire shape new worlds. Yet even that isn't punishment. It's simply the mind continuing to create. Perhaps that's what makes this teaching so gentle and so radical. It doesn't divide existence into heaven or hell, reward or blame. It says that what we meet after death is not alien. It is ourselves. Every emotion, every attachment, every act of kindness reflected back as landscape and vision. And so, the Bardo Thödol becomes more than a scripture. It is a mirror. It asks, what will you see when everything else falls away? To the Tibetans, preparing for death means preparing to stay awake, to meet the clear light without fear, to recognize your own nature within it. The lamas who read the text to the dying do so softly, guiding awareness like a lantern through the dark, reminding the soul that even as form dissolves, it is safe, it is seen. For us, in modern times, the question remains the same, but the language changes. How do we face the unknown? Can we live in such a way that when the moment comes, we meet it not with panic, but with quiet recognition? Maybe that's why this ancient text still resonates. It offers not answers, but a way of seeing. It whispers that dying and living are not opposites. They are two sides of one continuous unfolding. If you listen closely beneath all the metaphors, it's saying something simple. Awareness does not belong to life or death. It simply is. And perhaps by learning to die consciously, we begin to live consciously as well. From here, the story opens into the origins of this mysterious book, and the visionaries who first dared to map the unseen. Long before telescopes mapped the heavens or scientists traced the patterns of the brain, people in the high mountains of Tibet were exploring another kind of frontier, the landscape within. For them, the mystery of consciousness was not something to be measured, but something to be experienced directly. They saw the mind as the most delicate instrument in existence, capable of perceiving not just thoughts or dreams, but the entire architecture of reality itself. The Bardo Thödol, or the Tibetan Book of the Dead, was part of that experiment. It was said to have been composed by the legendary teacher Padmasambhava more than 12 centuries ago, and later hidden as a spiritual treasure, to be rediscovered when the time was right. When it was found again by the master Karma Lingpa in the 14th century, the text was not treated as an ancient curiosity, but as a living guide. It spoke of consciousness in ways that modern science is only beginning to imagine, not as something trapped inside the skull, but as a field, vast and luminous, that could move beyond the body when the body's functions ceased. The word bardo in Tibetan means between. It refers to any threshold, any passage from one state to another. Death, of course, is the most dramatic of these, but the Tibetans recognized many smaller ones. There is the bardo of birth, the bardo of dreams, the bardo of meditation, the bardo of dying, the bardo of the luminous mind, and finally, the bardo of becoming, where new life takes shape. Each bardo, they said, offers a chance to wake up, to recognize awareness itself, free from the distractions of form. The great secret of the Bardo Thödol is that this awakening is possible not only at the moment of death, but at every moment of life. Think for a moment about how many transitions you move through in a single day. Waking up from a dream, leaving home for work, the small hush between two breaths, the second before you say yes or no. These are tiny in-betweens, little bardos, each one a door into awareness. In that pause between what was and what comes next, you can feel the same quality the Tibetans described: stillness, clarity, and the quiet hum of being. Modern neuroscience has begun to notice something similar. When the brain shifts from one state to another, say from wakefulness to sleep, there's a brief, undefined zone, a gap where the mind drifts. Most of us pass through it unconsciously, but those who meditate regularly often learn to notice that gap. They describe it as spacious, timeless, and strangely familiar. To the Tibetans, that space was not an absence but a presence, the same luminous awareness that appears at death, glimpsed in miniature during life. The lamas taught that the skill of recognizing these moments, these subtle transitions, is what prepares a person for the greater transition at the end. If you can stay conscious as you fall asleep, you're practicing for the moment when you fall out of the body. If you can recognize that your thoughts come and go, yet something remains aware beneath them, you're learning to recognize the clear light itself. It is said that in the first instant after death, consciousness experiences a brilliance beyond imagination, a clarity that holds every truth at once. But to see it, the mind must already know how to rest in stillness. Otherwise, it turns away, overwhelmed by its own light. So, in a sense, every moment of calm awareness we cultivate in life is rehearsal, an act of remembering what we'll need to know when the time comes. Imagine your life as a long, gentle laboratory of awareness. You're both the observer and the experiment. Each emotion, each reaction, is a phenomenon to be studied, not judged. The goal is not perfection, but understanding, learning to see how experience rises and falls like waves, while the ocean beneath remains unchanged. The Tibetans didn't speak of consciousness in terms of atoms or synapses. They spoke of wind, light, and mind. But if you listen carefully, their descriptions echo modern discoveries. When a person enters deep, meditation for instance, the outer senses withdraw. Hearing fades, touch softens, thought slows. Yet awareness doesn't vanish. It becomes clearer, wider, quieter. Science might describe this as the slowing of brain activity. A Tibetan master would say that the coarse layers of the mind are dissolving, revealing subtler levels beneath. Both views point to the same observation. What we are is deeper than we think. To them, death was not an enemy to resist, but the final unveiling of that depth. It was a moment when the mind's own radiance could be seen directly, if one had trained to recognize it. That's why the Bardo Thödol is read aloud beside the dying, not as a ritual to ward off spirits, but as a reminder of what is already true. The text speaks to the consciousness of the person, describing what they are about to encounter, the light, the visions, the feelings, so that hearing it, they might recognize themselves within it. Picture that moment, a quiet room, perhaps high in the mountains, prayer flags fluttering outside. A lama sits beside the bed, reading in a calm, rhythmic voice. The body of the dying person lies still, but awareness listens. The words describe each stage that will unfold, each light that will appear, each fear that may arise. The lama reminds them gently, "Do not be afraid. All that you see is your own mind. Remember the clear light. Recognize it as your true nature." Even if we are far from Tibet, far from monasteries or rituals, there is something universal in this scene. We all face moments when the familiar dissolves, when life changes so completely that it feels like a kind of death. A loved one gone, a chapter ending, the silence after goodbye. These are bardos too, and they call for the same courage, the courage to stay awake as the world shifts around you. Maybe that's what this 1,000-year experiment in awareness was truly about. Not escaping death, but meeting it, again and again in every moment of impermanence, until even dying becomes just another form of awakening. If we follow the thread a little further, the story now turns toward the first great threshold itself, the moment of death, when the clear light appears and the ultimate test of awareness begins. In a bright hospital room, machines hum softly. A screen glows with the faint rhythm of a heart. For the modern world, this is the edge of life, a clinical moment defined by numbers, waves, and lines. When the pulse flatlines, we say it is over. But for the Tibetans, this is only the outer surface of an unfolding much more intricate, much more mysterious. They would say that the instruments stop recording because they were never designed to detect what happens next. They can measure the flicker of electricity through neurons, but not the radiance of awareness itself. The Bardo Thödol suggests that consciousness does not depend on the body the way flame depends on a candle. The body is simply its temporary lamp. When the lamp is extinguished, the flame is not destroyed. It disperses, expands, merges into the wider space from which it came. This idea might sound poetic, but it resonates in surprising places. Studies of near-death experiences, those strange stories told by people who are clinically dead for minutes before being revived, describe a similar transition. The details vary, but the patterns repeat. The sensation of leaving the body, the weightlessness, the quiet peace, the radiant light that feels somehow familiar. For scientists, these are mysteries of the brain under stress. For spiritual traditions, they are glimpses of the Bardo. The Tibetans were careful, though. They never said you should believe blindly. Instead, they offered a method, a way to train awareness so that, when the moment comes, you don't panic or cling. That is why they called it the science of dying. But the word science here didn't mean laboratories or microscopes. It meant direct observation, testing within experience itself. Their experiment took place not in sterile rooms, but in caves, monasteries, and long nights of meditation. Practitioners observed how thoughts rise and dissolve, how dreams take form, how the sense of self can expand or vanish altogether. In these inner laboratories, they noticed something profound. The more you let go, the clearer the mind becomes. The less you cling, the more reality opens. In a way, we experience this every day in miniature. When you drift into sleep, you release the waking world. When you exhale fully, there is a brief pause before the next breath. When you forgive someone, a tightness inside you loosens. All of these are moments of letting go, and each one reveals, however briefly, a kind of peace. The Bardo Thödol teaches that death is the ultimate letting go. The senses withdraw, the body grows light, and the boundaries between inner and outer begin to blur. Tibetan teachers describe this process as a gradual dissolution of the elements. Earth dissolves into water, the body loses its strength. Water dissolves into fire, the warmth of life fades. Fire dissolves into air, the breath slows. Air dissolves into space, the final exhalation. And then space dissolves into consciousness, the mind released from its frame. It's not meant to be understood as chemistry or physics, but as a sequence of felt experience, a poetic anatomy of the soul's departure. If we translate this into modern language, we might say, the systems of the body shut down one by one, but awareness itself, the very sense of being, continues a little longer. For those who are prepared, this is the moment of extraordinary opportunity. The text describes what happens next. A sudden brilliance, pure and infinite, appears before consciousness. It is called the clear light, or in Tibetan, Odsal. It's said to be the natural radiance of mind itself, the source from which all thoughts, all worlds arise. To encounter it without fear is to recognize one's own true nature, to see that awareness and the universe are not two, but the light is overwhelming. For most, it flashes by too quickly to grasp. The untrained mind, accustomed to shadows and movement, cannot bear its stillness. It retreats. That instant of recognition is missed, and consciousness drifts deeper into the bardos, where visions and emotions take shape. The Tibetans were never judgmental about this. They simply described it as the natural rhythm of awareness, expansion and contraction, clarity and confusion, much like breathing. Even missing the clear light is not failure. It is simply another turn of the wheel, another lesson to be lived. Still, they taught that familiarity makes all the difference. A mind that has tasted stillness in meditation is not startled by it at death. One that has practiced awareness in moments of fear can remain calm when the body fades. This is why the monks meditate on impermanence, not to be morbid, but to become intimate with change. For them, the acceptance of impermanence was the deepest kind of courage. They knew that clinging to what must pass only multiplies fear. When you learn to let go, you find that what you are cannot be taken away. The self that vanishes is only the form. The awareness that sees it vanish remains untouched. Imagine watching a wave rise and fall on the ocean. To the wave, the moment of breaking feels like death. But the ocean beneath it never ends. It simply takes another shape, another rhythm. To recognize that you are the ocean, not the wave, that is the essence of liberation. Modern physics, in its own way, hints at something similar. Matter and energy never truly disappear. They transform. The particles that once formed your body will scatter into air and soil, becoming something else. If the physical world follows this continuity, perhaps consciousness, its most delicate expression, does too. Yet what matters most in the Tibetan view is not proving it, but preparing for it. The Lama who reads the Bardo Thödol to the dying isn't offering dogma. He's giving reminders. Each phrase is like a gentle hand on the shoulder. Remember the light. Do not fear what comes. Recognize your own awareness. These instructions are less about belief and more about orientation, a way of meeting the unknown with grace. And what about us, those still very much alive? The lesson is the same. Every time you practice awareness, every time you pause before reacting, you're rehearsing the art of dying well. You're training the mind to stay steady when the familiar dissolves. There's a quiet practicality in that, because long before we face our final breath, we experience many small deaths, endings of love, loss, identity, certainty. And each time we're invited to let go, to trust the unfolding, to see what remains when everything else falls away. Maybe that is the hidden science in all of this. Not equations or instruments, but observation, the steady noticing of what changes and what does not. A lifetime spent in that observation becomes its own kind of enlightenment. As we drift further into the story, the path now carries us toward what the Bardo Thödol calls the first great threshold, the moment when consciousness meets the clear light directly, standing on the edge of the infinite. Imagine you are lying in a quiet room. The air is still, the light soft. Each breath comes a little slower than the one before. The edges of the world begin to blur, the ticking of the clock, the hum of the lamp, the rhythm of your own pulse fading into something more distant. In the language of medicine, this is the shutting down of the body. In the language of the Bardo Thödol, it is the opening of a door. The moment of death is not an abrupt end, but a gradual unfolding, like a flower closing its petals in reverse. First, the outer senses withdraw. You no longer feel the weight of the body, the sound of the room, the texture of air. Then the inner senses begin to dissolve, the awareness of time, of direction, of self. It is said that as each layer fades, another, more subtle layer of consciousness awakens. Tibetan masters describe this transition with the poetry of the 5 elements. The solidity of the body, called the earth element, loosens. You may feel as if you are sinking, or that the ground beneath you is melting. The fluid element, associated with water, begins to ebb. The mouth and throat dry, the inner currents grow still. The warmth of fire diminishes. The body cools from the feet upward. The air element disperses. The breath becomes faint until it stops altogether. But even as the body rests, something remains. The Bardo Thödol calls this the consciousness principle. It has no fixed shape, no colour, no location, yet it is aware. And in the first instant after the final breath, it perceives something extraordinary, a light so pure that language can only hint at it. This is the clear light of reality, the odd soul, the radiant nature of mind itself. The text says it shines like a sky before dawn, boundless and free. There is no fear in it, no sound, no form, only an all-encompassing brilliance. It is not outside of you. It is what you have always been beneath the noise of thought. For those who can recognize this moment, liberation is immediate. To see the light as one's own awareness is to awaken completely, to merge with the infinite clarity that underlies all things. It is said that this recognition feels like remembering something you've known forever. The way a dreamer realizes they are dreaming and in that instant is free. But the text is compassionate. It knows that most minds are not ready for such vastness. Imagine walking from a dimly lit room into blazing sunlight. Your first instinct is to shield your eyes. In the same way, consciousness, unaccustomed to its own magnitude, recoils. The light fades, not because it disappears, but because attention turns away. What follows are the visions of the bardos, reflections of the mind still searching for familiarity. Modern accounts of near-death experiences describe something uncannily similar. People who have been declared clinically dead for a few minutes often recall a radiant light, loving, intelligent, enveloping. Some feel they have met an essence of profound unity. Others say time stopped altogether and there was only peace. Science might explain this as brain activity under stress, or the release of natural chemicals that induce vivid perception. But those who live through it insist the experience was more real than life itself. The Bardo Thödol would suggest that both perspectives are true, each describing the same event in its own language. The chemical reactions may be the footprints, but the experience itself is the path, the awakening of awareness beyond its usual frame. This moment, the meeting with the clear light, is considered the most precious in existence. It is the great invitation offered to every being, regardless of who they were or what they believed. The text says, "Now the pure light of reality dawns upon you. Recognize it, and you are free." Yet it does not promise fearlessness. Even those who spent their lives in contemplation may tremble as the familiar dissolves. The difference lies not in having no fear, but in recognizing it as another passing cloud within the luminous sky. The Tibetans viewed this not as philosophy, but as a skill to be practiced. They spent years preparing for the instant of death, meditating on impermanence, practicing recognition of the mind's natural clarity, rehearsing the art of letting go. Each practice was a way of learning to stay awake as the elements faded. Imagine that in your final moments, someone sits beside you, reading softly. You hear their voice, faint but steady. "O noble one, now the clear light of reality dawns upon you. Recognize it as your own nature." These words are not spells, they are reminders. They point back toward the awareness that has never been born and can never die. If you could rest in that light, you would discover what the Tibetans called the natural state of the mind: spacious, luminous, compassionate. Nothing needs to be added or removed. There is nothing to become. Liberation, they say, is not a journey but a recognition. We may wonder how such an idea fits with what we know from science. Yet even science, at its edges, speaks a similar language. Energy never ceases, it transforms. Information is conserved, it changes form. Awareness perhaps follows a rhythm just as subtle. If we translate the ancient symbols into modern imagery, we might say, consciousness is not destroyed. It reorganizes, redistributes, continues in a form beyond our instruments. For the Tibetans, this continuation is not mere survival, it is revelation. Death is not the end of the story, but the moment the storyteller steps into the tale. When the senses fall silent, what remains is the witness itself, the silent clarity that has been observing all along. There is something quietly comforting in that. It suggests that the final threshold is not a wall but a horizon. Beyond it lies the same awareness that looked out through your eyes when you were a child, that felt wonder at the first snowfall, that watches these words now. The only difference is that the horizon has widened. To prepare for this recognition is not a matter of belief but of intimacy, with stillness, with change, with the unknown. When you sit in silence and notice that awareness continues even when thoughts subside, you are already glimpsing the clear light in miniature. Every time you fall asleep, every time you emerge from deep rest, you are practicing dying and being reborn. And so, the Bardo Thödol teaches that we have endless opportunities to awaken, if not in death, then in life, if not in one moment, then in the next. Awareness waits patiently, like the sky, never judging, never forcing, always ready to be recognized. As we follow the thread a little further, the journey will carry us into the next realm, the Bardo of visions, where the light of mind begins to take form, shaping landscapes of peace and fear, beauty and chaos. But for now, let the idea settle gently. The end of breath is not the end of being. It is the beginning of seeing what has always been there. If you were to watch the moment of death with calm eyes, not as tragedy but as a process, you would see something extraordinary unfold. It isn't sudden nor cruel. It is a quiet choreography, an unravelling that mirrors the way the world itself moves. Clouds dispersing after a storm, waves withdrawing back into the sea. The Tibetans saw this process with remarkable clarity, and they described it in poetic terms as the dissolution of the elements. Not chemical elements in the modern sense, but symbolic ones, woven into the language of the body, the mind, and the earth. They spoke of 5: earth, water, fire, air, and space. Each represents both a physical quality and a mental one, a link between the body and the consciousness it shelters. The fading of each element brings its own sensations and visions, both subtle and profound. It begins with earth dissolving into water. The solidity of the body loosens. Muscles lose their strength. The grip on the world relaxes. The person may feel heavy or unstable, as though sinking into the ground. Mentally, this stage brings confusion, a sense that the familiar world is crumbling. In that moment, the mind begins to realize it can no longer hold on to form. Then, water dissolves into fire, the body dries, the lips and tongue become parched, the inner fluids that once nourished the system begin to ebb. Emotionally, this is the loosening of attachment, the recognition that what once flowed easily, comfort, warmth, connection, is slipping away. If we translate this into modern language, we might say that the body's circulation slows, moisture evaporates, and the awareness within begins to withdraw from sensation. Next comes fire dissolving into air. The warmth fades from the limbs. The heartbeat weakens. In traditional imagery, the light of the inner flame dims, and the body grows cool from the feet upward. The Tibetan texts describe this as a time when external sounds begin to blur, as if coming from far away. The mind too loses its focus. The emotions that once burned brightly, anger, passion, ambition, begin to extinguish. Then air dissolves into space. The breath becomes shallow, irregular. Each exhalation stretches longer, each inhalation more uncertain, until the final breath releases completely. To the observer, this looks like the end. But within, something vast is unfolding. As the breath leaves, awareness no longer depends on lungs or heartbeat. It begins to expand, untethered. Finally, space dissolves into consciousness. This is the moment described as the dawning of the clear light. The world as we know it, forms, sensations, sounds, falls away, and what remains is the luminous field of pure awareness. The Tibetans said that this light is not something to be sought. It has always been there. Only now, with every veil removed, it shines without obstruction. It is easy to hear this and imagine a kind of mysticism beyond reach. But the truth is that we witness these dissolutions every day in smaller forms. When you fall asleep, the senses fade one by one. The feeling of your body, the sound of the room, the boundary between thought and dream. When you lose yourself in music or in the quiet beauty of a sunset, the same melting occurs. Something in you lets go of the edges and opens into stillness. These are small rehearsals for the greater letting go that death represents. To the Tibetan masters, the elements were not just metaphors, they were the intimate connection between the individual and the cosmos. The same earth that cradles mountains forms our bones. The same water that fills oceans moves through our blood. The same fire that fuels stars warms our breath. Air flows through us as wind flows across valleys. And space, the vastness that holds it all, is the same space that gives room for our thoughts to arise. So when these elements dissolve, it is not a disappearance but a return. The body goes back to what it came from, and consciousness, freed from its temporary dwelling, rejoins the wider current of being. The Tibetans described this with reverence, not fear, because it meant reunion. Science, when stripped of its language, observes something similar. Energy cannot vanish, it transforms. The particles of a living body, when released, feed soil, plants, and air. The cycle continues, elegant and exact. What the Tibetans added was a layer of poetry, the suggestion that consciousness too obeys this rhythm of transformation. Whether one calls it awareness, mind, or soul, it moves with the same natural grace as the tides. As this process unfolds, the dying may experience inner visions, flickers of light, sounds or patterns like ripples of colour in the dark. These are not illusions in the ordinary sense, but expressions of the mind's subtle layers coming undone. The Bardo Thödol describes them as inner signs. The shimmer of mirage, the swirl of smoke, the flicker of fireflies, the soft glow of candlelight, the flickering of sparks. Each marks the transition from one element to the next. It's important to understand that these images were never meant to frighten or mystify. They were guides, gentle descriptions of what consciousness might feel as it releases from the body. To someone who is trained in awareness, these signs are not alarming, they are familiar landmarks. The meditator recognizes them as thresholds, reminders to stay calm and awake. Imagine watching your life dissolve in slow motion, yet feeling no terror, only awe. The edges of identity blur, the small boundaries of self give way, and what remains is something immense, silent, and tender. In that vast stillness, you realize that the elements were never truly separate from one another. They were always dancing together, each giving birth to the next, just as breath becomes sound, sound becomes silence, and silence becomes awareness. In Tibetan temples, this teaching is not delivered with fear, but with a kind of serene wonder. To contemplate the dissolution of the elements is to learn how to trust the natural rhythm of existence. It invites us to practice letting go while we're still alive, of grudges, of tension, of the illusion that we can hold the moment still. Each time we release something we thought we couldn't, we take one step closer to peace. When the final dissolution comes, it will not be foreign. It will be a continuation of what we've practiced all along, the art of surrender. As we drift further into the story, consciousness, now free from the body, begins to perceive a new landscape. The pure light has flashed, but if it is not recognized, the mind continues onward, creating worlds out of its own reflections. Shapes appear, first gentle, then vivid. The next stage begins, the Bardo of visions, where the mind meets itself face to face. When the radiance of the clear light fades, something curious happens. The mind, unable to rest in formless brightness, begins to dream. It doesn't drift into sleep exactly. It creates. Just as clouds gather after a bright morning, shapes begin to form within the endless space of awareness. What arises is what the Bardo Thödol calls the Bardo of visions, the realm where the mind encounters its own reflections. At first, the experience is subtle, a sense of colour, vibration, movement. Then, as thought stirs, these patterns take form. They may appear as luminous deities, serene and gentle, or as fierce, thunderous presences. The text describes hundreds of such figures, each radiating from the heart of the mind like sparks from a flame. To the Tibetans, they were not gods in the sense of separate beings, but archetypes, expressions of the qualities within consciousness itself. The peaceful beings appear first. Their light is soft and steady, filling the space with calm and clarity. They are said to embody compassion, wisdom, patience, and serenity, the highest potentials of the mind. Their forms are symbolic: a figure seated on a lotus, hands in prayer, a smile that seems to see through all illusion. But these images are not hallucinations in the ordinary sense. They are the mind showing itself what it could become if it recognized its own light. For someone who practiced awareness in life, these visions may feel familiar. They might sense, behind the beauty of the forms, the presence of something larger, the pure awareness from which they arise. In that moment of recognition, liberation is possible. Seeing the peaceful beings as one's own essence, the mind dissolves into stillness once again. But if fear or doubt arises, the vision changes. The soft lights begin to flicker, the serene faces darken, and the same energy that once appeared as gentle compassion becomes fierce. This is when the wrathful deities appear, terrifying, fiery, powerful. They roar, they chase, they shake the sky. To an unprepared consciousness, it feels as though the universe itself has turned hostile. Yet even here, the Bardo Thödol whispers a gentle truth. These two are projections of the mind. They are not enemies, but mirrors. Every wrathful figure represents something unresolved: anger, jealousy, pride, guilt. Energies we carried in life that now rise in pure, unfiltered form. Their purpose is not to punish, but to reveal. Imagine dreaming of being chased by a storm. In the dream, you run, terrified. But the moment you realize the storm is part of the dream itself, the fear dissolves. You wake within it. That is what the Tibetans meant by recognition. The peaceful and wrathful beings are like waves on the same ocean. One shimmers in sunlight, the other rises in thunder. But both are water. Carl Jung, the great psychologist, once read the Bardo Thödol and called these visions archetypes of the collective unconscious. He saw them as universal symbols that live in every human mind: the wise elder, the nurturing mother, the avenging warrior, the playful child. Whether one believes in literal deities or not, these forms speak the language of our deepest psyche. They show us what is hidden beneath daily thought, the patterns that shape our fears and desires. In this way, the Bardo of Visions is not just a mythic landscape, but a mirror of the psyche. The text teaches that what we see here is what we carried all along. Every thought, emotion and attachment becomes visible, painted on the vast canvas of mind. It is an unfiltered self-portrait drawn by the soul. For the untrained, this can be overwhelming. The beauty can be too intense, the terror too vivid. Some flee from the visions, believing them to be external forces. But for those who practiced awareness, who learned in life to watch thoughts rise and fall without clinging, there is understanding. They can see these forms for what they are, the mind revealing its own landscape. If you think about it, we experience this principle even while alive. When anger grips you, the world seems filled with hostility. When you are in love, the the same world glows with warmth. Reality appears to change, but what actually changes is perception. The Bardo simply magnifies this process to an infinite scale. There, thoughts become worlds, emotions become beings, and awareness moves through them like light through crystal. The Bardo Thödol encourages the traveller not to resist what appears, but to look directly. If you can see even the most frightening image as a reflection of your own mind, it loses its power. In that moment of courage, liberation can occur. The wrathful gods dissolve back into light, and the journey continues upward, not downward. To prepare for this, Tibetans practice meditation on both peaceful and wrathful forms. They visualize these deities in vivid detail, sometimes for hours, until the boundary between imagination and reality blurred. The goal was not worship, but familiarity, to learn that all appearances, even the terrifying ones, are mind-made. In modern terms, we might call this a form of psychological integration, meeting the shadow within, embracing it, and transforming it through understanding. This is a lesson that carries beautifully into ordinary life. Every time we face a fear and choose to see it rather than run from it, we're doing what the Bardo Thödol describes. Each confrontation with anger, jealousy, or grief is a small rehearsal for the Bardo visions. When you recognize emotion as energy, not identity, it begins to release. Think of a moment when you were truly angry, your heart pounding, your face hot, words forming faster than you could stop them. In that instant, awareness was still there, watching. It saw the surge of emotion, but was not the emotion itself. If you've ever noticed that gap between feeling and witnessing, you've touched the same awareness that, in the Bardo, can see through the illusions of its own creation. The text describes the visions lasting 7 days, though it does not mean 7 days in earthly time. It means 7 cycles of experience, 7 opportunities to recognize awareness through form. Each day the lights grow dimmer, the deities more distant, as the mind drifts away from the brilliance of the clear light and deeper into its own projections. Even so, there is hope at every stage. The Bardo Thödol is compassionate. It says liberation is always one recognition away. The mirror can be seen at any moment. The peaceful and wrathful are never separate from the light that births them. To the Tibetans, this was not a lesson in theology, but in psychology, centuries before the word existed. They understood that the afterlife is not punishment or paradise, but continuity, consciousness exploring itself until it learns what it truly is. Perhaps that's why this teaching still speaks to us. It tells us that nothing within us, no emotion, no memory, is our enemy. Everything can be transformed through recognition. Every storm hides the sky it moves through. Every shadow proves the presence of light. From here, our quiet exploration turns toward the next great passage, the Bardo of rebirth, where the patterns of thought and feeling, shaped by lifetimes of habit, begin to draw the mind toward new existence. But before we cross that threshold, let the image of this Bardo linger, the mind surrounded by its own light, learning slowly to recognize itself. Imagine now that the great light has faded. The brilliance that once filled every corner of awareness has softened into twilight. There is no body, no heartbeat, no sound, only a quiet drifting. You're not falling exactly, but being carried, drawn onward by something both gentle and certain. This is what the Bardo Thödol calls the Bardo of becoming, or the Bardo of rebirth. It is the 3rd stage of the journey, where consciousness, having turned away from the clear light, begins to move once again toward form. The Tibetans describe this realm as luminous and weightless, like a sea of possibilities. Here, awareness is still fluid. Thoughts are not whispers, they are forces. Every emotion is amplified. Every impulse takes shape. You might say that the mind, having lost its physical vessel, becomes the artist of its own reality. and like any artist, it paints with the colours it knows best, its habits, its longings, its fears. This is karma, not as judgment, but as resonance. In modern language, it is the principle of vibration. Everything you think, say, or do leaves a subtle trace, a frequency. When the body falls away, these frequencies remain, humming quietly within consciousness. In the Bardo of rebirth, they act like magnets, drawing awareness toward whatever resonates most strongly. If, during life, the heart was filled with compassion, that resonance calls forth brightness, warmth, and clarity. If fear or anger was often dominant, the energy pulls toward denser forms, darker shades of experience. But there is no punishment here, only reflection. What you meet is what you've created, just as a song repeats its own melody. The Bardo Thödol describes this stage as full of visions. Worlds unfold like mirrors, each shimmering with a different tone of light. Some are peaceful and inviting, others shadowed and chaotic. Each vision represents a possible path, a new birth shaped by the sum of one's mind. The consciousness drifts among them, drawn by the invisible gravity of its own tendencies. It's a hauntingly beautiful idea, that creation is not something done by an outside force, but by the energy of awareness itself. You are both the painter and the canvas, the sculptor and the stone. Every choice you have made, every intention you have carried, becomes a brushstroke. The picture forming before you is your own, and within it lies the seed of your next life. If this sounds abstract, imagine it through something familiar. Have you ever woken from a dream still wrapped in its emotion, joy, grief, longing, and felt it tint your mood for hours after? That lingering echo is like karma, energy that persists, colouring what comes next. The Tibetans simply extended that continuity beyond one lifetime, suggesting that consciousness itself carries the emotional imprints of everything it has ever touched. Within this third bardo, these imprints begin to shape new realities. The mind, still luminous, begins to imagine a body, a world, a story to enter. The process is neither random nor chosen in the way we choose between two meals or two roads. It is more like water finding the shape of the ground beneath it, flowing naturally toward what fits its slope. The Bardo Thödol tells us that in this realm, consciousness may see flashes of potential worlds, glimpses of landscapes, beings, even parents-to-be. Drawn by attraction or aversion, it gravitates toward one. The pull is irresistible because it is familiar. It matches the vibration of the mind's deepest patterns. But even here there is freedom. Awareness can pause. It can recognize the process unfolding and choose differently. Not through force, but through clarity. To see the pull is to loosen it. To remember the clear light, even faintly, is to open another possibility. Transcendence beyond the cycle of rebirth. This is why the Tibetan masters trained so deeply in mindfulness. They understood that the state of mind at death determines the path that follows. If you can maintain awareness, even a glimmer of compassion or presence, you can influence the next step. It is not about escaping the world, but entering it consciously, guided by wisdom rather than habit. Perhaps the simplest way to understand this is to see how it mirrors life itself. Every moment we're reborn into new thoughts, new moods, new decisions. Each choice shapes the next. We're constantly recreating ourselves from the momentum of what came before. The Bardo of rebirth is this same principle magnified, the ultimate reflection of how our inner state creates the world we inhabit. In this view, karma is not a cosmic bookkeeping system. It is rhythm, a kind of spiritual gravity, like attracts like. The anger we hold pulls us toward situations that echo it. The kindness we cultivate draws us toward compassion, again and again, until the pattern itself becomes liberation. Modern psychology might describe this in terms of conditioning, the way experiences shape neural pathways and emotional responses. The Tibetans express the same truth in poetic language. Consciousness follows its own traces. The impressions of our thoughts and deeds, like footprints in soft snow, guide us back along the same trails until we learn to walk differently. The Bardo Thödol teaches that recognizing this law, even for a moment, changes everything. Once you see that the world is being created through you, not simply around you, you gain the power to paint with intention. You can choose gentler colours. You can soften the brush. You can step back from the canvas and breathe. As the mind moves deeper into the bardo of rebirth, it may encounter sounds, winds rushing, voices calling, fragments of memory from the life just lived. These are the last echoes of attachment, the mind's attempt to grasp what is already dissolving. For the untrained, these sounds provoke fear or longing, leading consciousness into a new womb, a new existence. For the mindful, they are reminders. This too is creation. This too will pass. Ultimately, this stage is not about leaving one life for another, but about recognizing that both are the same flow. Rebirth is simply the mind continuing its movement, just as a river curves and becomes another river without ever ceasing to be water. If we look closely, we can see this same movement in every breath. You inhale, the birth of experience. You exhale, the release. Between them lies a tiny pause, a still point of awareness. That pause is the bardo, the timeless space between what was and what will be. To find peace there, even for an instant, is to touch the freedom the Tibetans spoke of. So, as the consciousness drifts among visions, surrounded by the echoes of its own thoughts, the message of the Bardo Thödol remains gentle but firm. Do not be afraid. What you are seeing is your own mind. Recognize it, and the current loses its pull. Forget it, and the river carries you onward to another shore. And yet, even that isn't wrong. The text assures us that no journey is wasted. Every rebirth, every experience becomes another chance to wake up. The universe is infinitely patient, endlessly creative, and always offering another beginning. From here, the story turns softly back toward life itself. The Tibetans never meant these teachings to be only about dying. They're instructions for living, for seeing how the same laws shape every thought and dream. Our quiet exploration now turns toward that reflection, how understanding these inner landscapes, the bardos of mind and emotion, can prepare us for the vastness still to come. If we follow the thread a little further, we begin to see that the bardos are not distant realms waiting for us beyond death. They are here, woven quietly into every moment of life. The Tibetans understood this long before modern psychology existed. They knew that the mind doesn't need to die to experience transition. It happens whenever awareness shifts, when one thought ends and another begins, when a dream opens, when a silence falls. In that sense, the bardos are not otherworldly. They are states of consciousness. The afterlife, in this view, is not a different place, but a continuation of the mind's patterns. Death simply magnifies what has always been there. The only difference is that, without the body, the process becomes more vivid, more transparent. If you've ever woken from a dream and felt that strange mixture of clarity and confusion, you've tasted a small bardo. The world feels real and unreal at the same time. You might recall vivid colours, impossible landscapes, people who felt close yet distant. Then the dream fades, and the mind steps back into another level of awareness, this waking life. But how can we be sure this state is not another dream, simply longer and more consistent? The Bardo Thödol invites that question. It doesn't ask you to reject ordinary life, only to see its fluidity. The walls, the names, the identities we hold are part of a vast ongoing illusion, real enough to experience, yet changing from moment to moment. To recognize this is not to dismiss life, but to live it with deeper attention. Modern science, with all its instruments, often explores the same mystery through different language. Neurologists can watch brain activity flicker like constellations during sleep and meditation. Psychologists speak of consciousness as layered, awake, dreaming, subconscious, and beyond. But none of these measurements capture the essence of awareness itself. That awareness, the Tibetan said, is the thread that continues through every bardo, the silent witness that remains as worlds come and go. To them, training in awareness was not a religious duty. It was mental hygiene. It was a way of understanding the landscape of the mind before it overwhelmed you. They observed that fear, attachment, and desire all have their own vibrations, their own gravity. Left unchecked, these forces shape experience, just as the moon shapes tides. That's why the practice of meditation was called familiarization. You learn the terrain of your own mind before the great journey begins. Carl Jung once remarked that the line between the spiritual and the psychological is thin, perhaps even imaginary. He saw myths and visions not as fantasies, but as symbolic languages through which the psyche speaks. The peaceful and wrathful deities of the Bardo Thödol are expressions of this language, archetypes, universal figures that exist within every person. The wise elder, the radiant mother, the destroyer, the protector. These are not gods above us, but patterns within us. When recognized, they reveal parts of the self we often ignore. The Tibetans didn't use words like archetype or subconscious. They used images, mountains, rivers, winds, flames. They spoke of thoughts as travelers, emotions as storms, awareness as sky. But beneath the poetry lies the same insight. What we experience outwardly is shaped by what we hold inwardly. Fear makes the world look sharp and cold. Love makes it glow. Confusion makes it flicker. Awareness itself, however, remains unchanged, like the sky holding every weather. Think about how a single emotion can transform perception. If you wake with anxiety, even gentle sunlight can seem harsh. If you wake with joy, the same light feels tender. Nothing outside has changed. Only the filter of awareness has shifted. That small distortion is what the Bardo Thödol describes on a cosmic scale. After death, there are no physical senses to anchor perception, so every thought, every feeling becomes a landscape. The world you meet is the echo of your own mind. That is why the Tibetans urged people to study these bardos in life. Because we are already living them. Every day brings small deaths, the end of a moment, a relationship, a dream. And with every ending, there is a chance to practice awareness, to watch what the mind creates, and to recognize its patterns is to become less captive to them. This isn't a call to detach or deny emotion. It's an invitation to see clearly. When you observe anger arise without acting on it, you are in that instant free. When you feel sadness and let it move through you without resistance, you are resting in awareness. These moments are not dramatic, they are quiet awakenings. They teach the mind that it can remain stable even as thoughts and feelings swirl. In Tibetan monasteries, teachers often remind their students, die every day. What they mean is, let the small self fall away again and again. Let opinions, grudges, and identities dissolve, so that what remains is simple awareness. This daily dying makes the great dying less foreign. It's like learning to swim before you reach the river. If you watch the mind carefully, you'll notice it moves in cycles. There's the spark of perception, the reaction, and the quiet after. That quiet, however brief, is a bardo. It's the space where choice exists. You can react from habit, or you can pause and respond with awareness. Each pause is a chance to step off the wheel of reaction, the same wheel that, in the bardos, becomes the cycle of rebirth. So, the study of the bardos is really the study of our own psychology. The outer descriptions, gods, lights, sounds, are metaphors for the inner experiences we all share. They teach us that every moment, life and death dance together. every thought born in awareness will also dissolve back into it. When we understand this, the afterlife becomes less mysterious, and this life becomes more sacred. You begin to realize that the borders between worlds are porous, that the same consciousness witnessing your morning coffee will one day witness the fading of the stars. The Tibetans never separated science, philosophy, and spirituality. To them, all were facets of the same inquiry. What is the nature of mind? The Bardo Thödol is one answer, written in symbols rather than equations. But its essence is universal. It asks us to look inward, to study the laboratory of our own awareness, to see how we construct heaven and hell in the space of a thought. In this quiet understanding lies great kindness. When you see that everyone around you is moving through their own bardos, each reacting to visions of fear or longing, you naturally become gentler. Compassion arises not from rule or duty, but from recognition. We're all travelers, dreaming within the same light, understanding our inner landscape now, while breath still moves through the body, prepares us for the vastness later. Awareness, once familiar, will not be frightening. It will feel like home. From here, our story deepens once more. The mind, now understood as the artist of its own reality, begins to meet the finest of its creations, the luminous forms of peace and compassion that dwell within it. These are called the peaceful beings, and to meet them is to glimpse the mind's true nature shining through the dream. If we follow the thread a little further, the mind's landscape begins to brighten. The shadows that once stirred during the dissolution have softened, and what unfolds now is something radiant and calm. This is the part of the Bardo Thödol where the peaceful beings appear, manifestations of the most luminous qualities of consciousness itself. They are not foreign entities or spirits from another world. They are the pure expressions of what already lives within you, waiting to be recognized. The texts describe these beings in exquisite detail. They emerge from fields of light, some white, some blue or golden, some shifting in color like water reflecting the sky. They shine with a beauty that is beyond description, yet strangely familiar. Some carry lotus flowers, some radiate halos of light, some sit in serene stillness, eyes open yet seeing far beyond the visible. Around them flows a sense of infinite compassion, the kind that dissolves fear before it can even arise. But the Bardo Thödol cautions that these forms are not outside you. They are your mind reflected back in its purest state. Each figure represents a quality that can be cultivated while alive: clarity, love, forgiveness, patience, joy. Seeing them in the Bardo is like meeting your own kindness face to face. To understand this gently, imagine moments in life when you felt utterly at peace, listening to music that quiets every thought, watching the sun slide down behind a hill, holding someone's hand in silence. In those moments, the small, restless self falls away and something vast but familiar shines through. That presence, soft and steady, is what the Tibetans called the mind's true nature. The peaceful beings are simply that presence made visible to awareness. In everyday terms, these experiences are not so distant. They are the flashes of insight when you forgive someone and feel an unexpected warmth, the quiet after laughter, the stillness in the breath that follows relief. Each is a glimpse of the peaceful Bardo, small awakenings within daily life. The Tibetans believe that those who practiced mindfulness or compassion during life could recognize these peaceful forms with ease after death. Familiarity breeds trust. If you have met stillness in meditation, the boundless stillness of the Bardo does not frighten you. If you have nurtured love in your heart, the light of compassion feels like home. And yet, even beauty can be overwhelming. The Bardo Thödol says that when these luminous beings appear, some souls turn away. Their radiance feels too intense, too pure, like staring into the heart of the sun. It is not the light that causes pain, but the contrast between the infinite and the narrow space of the self that still clings. The text's instruction, whispered softly to the dying, is simple. Do not turn away. Recognize this light as your own essence. It's worth pausing here, because this is not just a teaching about the afterlife. It's a reflection on how we meet joy in daily existence. Sometimes we're more afraid of happiness than of suffering. True peace can feel unfamiliar. We may doubt it, sabotage it, or search for something to fix. But when we learn to rest in the simple warmth of being, we're already practicing recognition of the peaceful beings. Think of it like this. When you watch sunlight on water, you see thousands of tiny reflections. Each glint seems separate, yet all are born from the same light. In the same way, each peaceful figure described in the Bardo Thödol is a reflection of the same awareness, the clear, luminous mind that exists in everyone. The most famous of these figures is Amitabha, the Buddha of infinite light. His presence symbolizes the radiance of compassion. He sits bathed in red light, the color of sunset and warmth. To see him is to be reminded that love is not a possession, but a state of being. Another is Vairochana, representing the mirror-like wisdom that sees all things without distortion. His light is pure white, clear as a winter sky. Each deity carries a teaching, a mirror of the heart's hidden wisdom. You don't need to remember their names or shapes to understand their meaning. They're simply archetypes, universal expressions of qualities that anyone can feel. The Tibetan tradition used these images as meditation aids, ways to anchor the formless in form. By contemplating compassion as a figure, the meditator could engage with it as something alive and relatable. In modern terms, you might think of this as visualizing your better self. When you imagine responding to others with patience or forgiveness, you are in a small way calling forth a peaceful being from within. Each time you act from empathy rather than reaction, that inner light grows stronger. The Bardo Thödol suggests that recognition of these forms can bring immediate liberation. When you see beauty and realize it is your own mind's reflection, the illusion of separation dissolves. There is no longer you and the vision. There is only awareness witnessing itself. This, the text says, is the gateway to freedom. Science may not speak of luminous beings, but it points to similar experiences in moments of awe. Neurologists have studied how feelings of wonder, staring at a vast night sky, or listening to music that moves the soul, can quiet the sense of self, expanding perception beyond its usual limits. For a brief time, the boundary between me and the world disappears. What remains is unity, peace, and humility, the same qualities described by the Tibetans centuries ago. The peaceful beings, then, are not confined to the moment of death. They visit in subtle ways while we live. Each time we pause before reacting, each time we breathe deeply and see clearly, we step into their radiance. The invitation is constant. Recognize the light within everything. As we move through life, surrounded by noise and distraction, these glimpses may seem small, but to the Tibetans, they were profound rehearsals. Every moment of presence prepares the mind to meet the light without fear. Awareness, once trained to rest in kindness and clarity, will recognize those same qualities when the great transition arrives. So, when the peaceful beings appear, whether in the bardo or in a quiet moment of everyday grace, they are not asking for worship. They are reminders. Each one whispers the same message: you're not lost, you're not separate, you're light meeting light. And if you can remember that, even for a heartbeat, then the journey through the bardos becomes something else entirely, not a passage through uncertainty, but a homecoming. From here, the story deepens again, for the same mind that gives birth to peace also gives birth to power. The light that comforts can also challenge. As the vision continues, serenity gives way to intensity. The gentle becomes fierce, the familiar turns wild. This is where the wrathful beings emerge, not to harm, but to awaken. As we drift further into the vision, the serene lights begin to tremble. The gentle glow of the peaceful beings gives way to something far more vivid, colours that pulse like lightning, sounds that shake the air. The same light that once comforted now blazes with intensity, and the space that felt infinite now seems alive with motion and power. This, the Bardo Thödol tells us, is the appearance of the wrathful beings. The word wrathful might suggest anger or punishment, but in Tibetan teaching these beings are not evil. They are fierce expressions of the same luminous mind that gave rise to the peaceful forms. Where the peaceful beings teach through calm recognition, the wrathful beings teach through shock, through awakening. They are the thunder that follows the lightning of clarity. To someone unprepared, their appearance can be terrifying. The texts describe them with blazing eyes, flames surrounding their bodies, roaring like the sound of 1,000 storms. They hold weapons, not to harm but to cut through illusion. They are energy in its rawest form, stripped of gentleness so that awareness can see its own strength. If you imagine this in modern terms, you might think of what happens when suppressed emotions finally rise to the surface. Anger long ignored, fear unacknowledged, guilt left to grow quietly. Eventually they burst through, demanding attention. They are not new creations. They were always there, hidden beneath the surface. The wrathful beings are the mind's way of meeting what it has avoided. In the Bardo of visions, this confrontation is magnified. Every unhealed thought, every buried emotion takes form. The gentle face of compassion becomes the fierce protector. The quiet flame of awareness becomes a raging fire of truth. To the mind that still clings to identity, it feels like attack. But to the mind that recognizes itself in these forces, it feels like release. The Tibetans used to say that these beings are mirrors polished by fire. They reflect not our comfort, but our resistance. They show us the exact edges where we refuse to let go. In this sense, their ferocity is kindness in disguise. The same energy that seems to frighten us is the force that breaks our chains. Think about the way thunder clears the air after a long, heavy storm. The lightning seems violent, but what follows is freshness. The smell of rain, the coolness that returns to the sky. The wrathful beings are like that storm. They arrive with sound and fire, but their goal is to cleanse, not destroy. They are truth spoken in the only voice the stubborn ego will listen to. In everyday life, we meet them more often than we realize. Each time we face a difficult emotion, each time life confronts us with pain, failure, or loss, we are meeting the wrathful aspect of existence. These moments strip away illusions about control. They can feel brutal, but beneath them lies clarity. Consider the times you faced something you didn't want to see. The end of a relationship, the loss of a dream, the realization of your own mistakes. At first, there is resistance, maybe anger or shame. But if you stay with it, if you can look at it directly, something begins to shift. The pain loses its power, and what remains is understanding. This is exactly what the Bardo Thödol describes, the transformation of fear into wisdom. In Buddhist iconography, one of the most striking wrathful figures is Mahakala, the great black one. His eyes burn with compassion hidden in ferocity. He dances in flames, holding a skull cup and a curved blade, symbols not of death, but of cutting through illusion. His laughter echoes like thunder, yet his heart is said to be pure love. To the Tibetans, he represents the ultimate paradox, that love sometimes takes a fierce form to wake us from sleep. Psychologists like Jung saw the same principle in human behavior. He called it shadow work, the process of facing the parts of ourselves we reject. When we deny anger or greed, they don't vanish. They sink into the unconscious, where they grow stronger. The only way to transform them is to face them consciously. In the Bardo, this happens automatically. The mind, stripped of its body and distractions, sees everything it ever hid. That is why the Bardo Thödol advises the traveller not to flee. Do not be afraid, it says. Recognize these beings as your own mind. They are you, and you are them. If the consciousness can stay steady and remember this truth, the wrathful beings transform instantly. Their terrifying faces soften, their fire turns to light, and the mind returns to peace. For most of us, this process doesn't wait until death. It unfolds constantly in the small bardos of daily life. When frustration rises and you resist it, the inner landscape darkens. When you pause, breathe, and acknowledge it, the storm passes. Every moment you meet your own emotions with awareness, you're learning to face the wrathful deities without fear. This idea also carries a deeper compassion. If everyone around you is meeting their own inner storms, then their anger or pain is not something personal. It's their own bardo. Seeing this, empathy naturally arises. You begin to understand that what looks like rage or cruelty in another is often fear wearing armour. And in that understanding, you become a little less reactive, a little more patient. The Tibetans never claimed this process was easy. They described it as the most intense part of the journey. Yet they also said that within these fierce encounters lies the greatest opportunity for freedom. Because when you see that the light and the storm come from the same source, you stop dividing the world into good and bad, heaven and hell. You see that both are made of mind, and that realization itself is liberation. Imagine for a moment that you're standing in the middle of a vast storm, not fighting it, not fleeing, just watching. The winds howl, lightning flashes, and yet you remain untouched, the witness of it all. Eventually, the storm exhausts itself and dissolves back into the sky. What remains is silence, clarity, and the open expanse of awareness. That sky is your true nature. The wrathful beings, the thunder, the lightning, they were just movements within it. This understanding doesn't require belief in gods or visions, it only asks for honesty. To see our own thoughts and emotions as passing weather, to stay still as they rise and fall, is the practice that leads through the storm. It is the same awareness the Tibetans spoke of, hidden within every moment of anger and every flash of fear. When we learn to meet even the fiercest energies with calm recognition, something beautiful happens. The forces that once frightened us become allies. The fire that once burned now illuminates. The storm no longer feels like punishment but transformation. As we move deeper into this exploration, we'll see how the peaceful and wrathful are not opposites but partners in awakening, two reflections of one mirror. Each reveals what the other hides, each completes the other's teaching, and it is through their union that awareness finally recognizes itself fully, beyond all form and division. The path now carries us gently into that realization, the divine mirror, where all appearances dissolve into clarity and the mind sees itself as both the creator and the reflection. When the storms have passed and the thunder of the wrathful beings fades into silence, there is a stillness unlike any other. The air feels lighter. The light softens once again, though this time it carries a deeper understanding. What seem to be opposites, peaceful and wrathful, calm and fierce, begin to blur into one. In this stillness, the Bardo Thödol reveals its most essential truth, that all appearances, whether radiant or terrifying, are reflections of the same mind. The Tibetans called this realization the mirror-like wisdom. They use the image because it is so simple, so precise. A mirror doesn't choose what it reflects. It doesn't prefer beauty over ugliness or joy over grief. It simply shows things as they are, untouched by what passes before it. In that same way, the nature of mind reflects everything, the light and the shadow, the birth and the ending, without being stained by any of it. When you look into an ordinary mirror, you can see your face, but you can never touch it. The reflection is real enough to see but intangible. The same is true of our thoughts and emotions. They seem vivid, solid, demanding. But when we look closer, they dissolve. They have no substance beyond awareness itself. Imagine for a moment that every experience you have ever had, every memory, every joy, every wound, is like a reflection on a vast mirror. The reflections come and go, yet the mirror remains. Even when covered by dust, it does not lose its shine. It simply waits to be wiped clean. The journey through the bardos is the process of that cleansing. The gentle visions of peace, the storms of wrath, the pull of rebirth, all of them polish the mirror, each in their own way until only clarity remains. In this stage, the mind begins to recognize its own face. It understands that what it feared were only its own expressions, distorted by confusion. The peaceful beings were its compassion. The wrathful ones were its strength. The light was its awareness, and the darkness was simply the absence of recognition. The realization dawns that there was never anything outside at all. This understanding is not philosophical. It is direct, wordless, like suddenly waking from a dream and seeing the room around you. There's a kind of laughter in it, a sense of relief. You realize that the entire drama, the beauty, the terror, the endless motion, was a single mind exploring itself. Even science, though it speaks in different tones, circles around this same mystery. Physicists tell us that the observer and the observed are deeply intertwined, that particles behave differently when watched. In a poetic sense, the universe itself seems to participate in its own unfolding. The Tibetans would nod gently and say, "Yes, that is the mirror." Everything is awareness reflecting awareness, endlessly. If you try to find a boundary between the reflection and the reflector, you cannot. Where does the thought end and the mind begin? Where does perception stop and reality start? The Bardo Thödol suggests there is no separation. To see that is liberation itself, the dissolving of the illusion of distance between self and world. In meditation, this can be glimpsed in small ways. Sit quietly for a few moments, and you'll notice that thoughts appear like ripples on water. If you chase them, the water grows disturbed. But if you simply watch, they fade, leaving the surface clear again. That clear surface is the mirror. The act of watching itself is awareness. The Tibetans often taught with simple analogies. One of their favourites was the sky. Clouds drift across it, sometimes white and soft, sometimes dark and thunderous, but the sky never fights them. It doesn't cling to the pleasant ones or resist the stormy ones. It allows, reflects, and remains. In the same way, awareness doesn't need to control what passes through it. When we stop struggling with the contents of our mind, we begin to rest in the clarity that has been there all along. This is the stage of profound reconciliation. The peaceful and the wrathful, once seen as opposites, are recognized as two movements of the same truth. One teaches gentleness, the other strength. Together, they form the complete picture of wisdom. To live with that understanding is to move through life like a mirror, open, reflective, unafraid of what appears. In everyday life, this can translate into something very practical. When someone criticizes you, you can watch the first spark of anger arise, but you don't have to follow it. When you see joy in another person's success, you can simply enjoy it without grasping. When sadness comes, you let it stay until it fades. The practice isn't to suppress or escape, but to observe. The more you observe, the clearer the mirror becomes. The Tibetans believed that the true goal of their teachings was not to escape the cycle of life and death, but to recognize its nature while still within it, to see everything, birth, loss, love, decay, as reflections within the mirror of mind. When you do, nothing needs to be rejected. Every moment becomes sacred because it reveals the same truth. Everything you see is awareness seeing itself. If you think of this in scientific language, you might imagine awareness as a field, boundless, continuous, always present. Individual minds are like waves rising within it, briefly taking shape before merging back into the whole. The mirror is not many mirrors, it is one vast surface reflecting infinite forms, and the forms, no matter how different, are never truly apart from the reflection itself. In this stage of realization, the fear of death loses its power, because if awareness cannot be divided, then it cannot die. The reflections change, the forms shift, but the mirror remains. When we understand this not as theory, but as living truth, a quiet peace begins to settle. We see that the entire journey, the bardos, the visions, the struggles, was never a path away from something, but a path toward recognition. This insight doesn't mean life becomes free of difficulty. The world will still offer joy and pain, creation and loss. But within it all, there's a subtle steadiness, a background of clarity that never wavers. You begin to live as though the mirror were visible at all times, even when clouds pass across it. You speak more gently, act more kindly, because you know every gesture ripples through the same awareness that connects everything. The Bardo Thödol closes this part of the journey with a simple instruction. Recognize all that appears as the play of your own mind and rest in its nature. That resting is not sleep and not indifference. It is an awake stillness, a luminous acceptance that holds the entire world without dividing it into good or bad, real or unreal. And so the traveller stands at a turning point. Having recognized the mirror, they have the freedom to rest in its clarity or to follow the next ripple of creation. Most will move forward, drawn by the gentle pull of karma into another beginning. But a few may simply remain, dissolved in the open sky of awareness, beyond fear and beyond form. From here the story begins to bend back toward life. The teachings of the Bardo Thödol remind us that we do not have to wait for death to find this clarity. We can practice seeing through the mirror every day, through breath, through kindness, through the quiet recognition that every experience, even this one, is another reflection glimmering on the surface of mind. As the visions of peace and fury dissolve into stillness, awareness finds itself in motion once again. Not in the way of walking or flying, but drifting, quietly, irresistibly, drawn by unseen currents. The Tibetans called this the Bardo of becoming, the passage where consciousness begins to seek a new form. To those who can see it, this stage is neither tragic nor miraculous. It is simply nature continuing its endless rhythm. The river flows downhill, the seed finds soil, the flame gives birth to light. In this in-between, there is no body, yet awareness feels movement. Thoughts no longer whisper, they sing. Every feeling becomes vibration, and every vibration finds its resonance. The Bardo Thödol describes this moment as consciousness being carried along by karmic winds, not punishment, but the gentle physics of mind. What has been cultivated in life are patterns of love, fear, curiosity, compassion, now guides where awareness will go. You can think of it like water seeking lower ground. It doesn't choose its direction. It flows naturally toward balance. In the same way, consciousness follows the path carved by its own tendencies. If the stream of a lifetime has been clear and kind, it moves toward clarity again. If it has been clouded with anger or grasping, it finds places that echo those tones. There is no external judge deciding this. It is resonance, simple and elegant. The Tibetans saw the world as a vast network of frequencies, each emotion, each intention, each thought vibrating in its own tone. When we die, they said, the dense body falls away, and only the resonance remains. That resonance attracts us toward matching worlds, just as a tuning fork hums when another of the same note is struck nearby. The mind, still luminous but impressionable, moves toward what feels familiar. This movement gives rise to the ancient image of the 6 realms, not as literal locations, but as symbolic landscapes of emotion. There is the human realm, woven from desire and reflection. the animal realm, built from instinct and fear, the godly realms, dazzling but fleeting, shaped by pride and pleasure, the demigod realms of endless striving and comparison, the hungry ghost realms of insatiable longing, and the hell realms where anger burns without end. To modern ears, these may sound like myths, yet we walk through them every day. When you're lost in jealousy, you're already in the realm of the demigods. When you're consumed by anger, you taste the heat of the hell realm. When you rest in quiet gratitude, you stand at the threshold of the human and the divine. These realms are psychological as much as metaphysical, maps of how the mind creates its own environment. The Tibetans didn't fear these realms, they studied them. They understood that each one teaches something essential. The human realm, they said, is the most precious, not because it's comfortable, but because it holds balance. Here, joy and sorrow coexist closely enough that awareness can awaken. Pleasure isn't endless, suffering isn't absolute. In that fragile balance lies the opportunity to see clearly. In the Bardo Thödol, consciousness passing through the bardo of becoming begins to sense potential worlds. Sounds, colours and forms shimmer in the distance. Some are bright, others dim. Each represents a possible life. The awareness, still charged with memories and tendencies, feels drawn toward one of them, as if recognising a forgotten song. It's said that the moment of rebirth arrives, when that recognition becomes identification, when consciousness says, "That is me." It might be drawn by compassion to help others, or by attachment to familiar desires. Either way, the process is guided not by external force, but by internal gravity. The energy of what we have loved and feared pulls us into shape again. This idea might sound otherworldly, but we can glimpse its logic in daily experience. Consider how moods attract matching circumstances. When you wake in gratitude, you notice beauty in small things. When you wake in resentment, the same world feels grey. The external hasn't changed, only the inner vibration has. Rebirth, in its essence, is this phenomenon magnified beyond a single day. Consciousness tunes itself to a certain frequency, and the universe responds. The Tibetans expressed this with gentle compassion. They didn't speak of guilt or sin, only continuity. Every life, every moment, is part of a vast symphony of becoming. What we do now is the melody we will later hear. Every thought paints a stroke on the canvas of our next existence. That's why they called life the laboratory of karma, a place to study how resonance shapes reality. If you find this idea too grand, return to something simple. Think of how habit works. A small action repeated becomes easier the next time. The mind, like the body, learns through repetition. This is karma in its most accessible form, the physics of habit. If we practice patience, it grows natural. If we feed anger, it sharpens its claws. Each moment of awareness is a brushstroke shaping who we will become, whether in this life or the next. The Tibetans visualize this process with extraordinary gentleness. They imagine a lama reading softly beside the dying, reminding the departing consciousness. Do not fear what you see. Remember the clear light. If you must take form again, choose with compassion. Even if recognition is brief, it plants a seed, a moment of lucidity that will blossom again in future lives, or in moments of great clarity while living. In that way, rebirth is not a trap but an invitation. The cycle continues until awareness fully understands itself, until it sees that the painter and the painting are one. Liberation, then, is not an escape from the cycle, but an awakening within it. When we think of it like this, the mystery of rebirth becomes less abstract. We are already participating in it moment by moment. Each thought gives rise to another. Each feeling shapes what follows. The person you will be tomorrow is born from the choices you make today. The next life begins not in another world, but in the next heartbeat. That's the quiet revelation behind this ancient teaching. reincarnation is not a distant promise or threat. It's happening now. You're writing your next chapter with every thought you have, every kindness you give, every time you choose awareness over habit. As this understanding settles, the path gently widens. The Tibetans did not stop at describing this cycle. They asked the deeper question, can we step out of it? Can consciousness, seeing its own patterns, learn to rest instead of spinning? The next teaching begins there, with the law of resonance itself, the rhythm that ties creation together and the possibility of transcending it through recognition. If we follow the thread a little further, we come to the quiet engine that drives the entire journey, the law of resonance. The Tibetans spoke of karma in these terms, not as moral bookkeeping, not as reward or punishment, but as rhythm. Every thought, every action, every breath creates a subtle vibration, and that vibration continues long after the moment passes. It seeks harmony with what matches it, just as one note awakens another across a room. This is the gentle truth behind what we often call fate. What returns to us is not judgment, it's resonance. Life answers in the same tone we play. A mind steeped in kindness vibrates at a different pitch than one steeped in anger, and so each experiences a different world, even while standing in the same sunlight. You can picture it through something simple. 2 tuning forks. Strike one, and the other begins to hum, not because of magic, but because of shared frequency. The Bardo Thödol described consciousness in the same way. After death, when the gross body falls away, only vibration remains, the pure tone of awareness coloured by the habits and emotions it carried. That tone determines which realms or experiences it will resonate with next. But we don't have to wait until death to see this law in motion. We see it every day. When you walk into a room where someone is angry, you feel it in your body before a word is spoken. When you smile genuinely at a stranger, their face softens in return. This isn't mysticism. It's the invisible communication of emotion, the exchange of resonance. Each of us is an instrument in a vast orchestra of consciousness, continuously tuning itself to the tones we emit. The Tibetans understood this law not as something to fear, but as something to work with. If you wish to change the melody of your life, you don't need to fight the old tune, you introduce a new one. Each act of patience, each moment of mindfulness, each compassionate thought creates a different vibration, one that begins to reshape the entire pattern. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the music changes. It helps to imagine this like ripples in a pond. Throw a pebble of anger, and sharp waves spread outward. Drop a pebble of kindness, and the ripples overlap, softening the disturbance. Eventually the water stills again, but the memory of both actions lingers. The pond of mind records everything, not as judgment, but as motion. Modern science, in its own language, hints at the same reality. Physicists speak of the universe as a vast field of energy, where every particle vibrates and every interaction leaves a trace. Psychologists observe that repeated choices form neural pathways, habits that shape perception and behaviour. The more a pattern repeats, the more it defines who we become. In this sense, karma is both cosmic and neurological, both mystical and measurable. It is simply cause and continuation, echo and answer. The Tibetans, with poetic simplicity, described it as wind. The karmic winds carry consciousness through the bardos, just as weather carries seeds across mountains. A seed doesn't decide where to land, it falls where the wind takes it, and it grows in the soil that suits its nature. But unlike seeds, consciousness can awaken. It can notice the wind, understand it, even redirect it through awareness. This is the beginning of liberation, realizing that we are not merely carried by the wind of habit, we are also the one who breathes. To see this more clearly, think about how repetition shapes identity. The first time you react in anger, it feels strong and unfamiliar. The 10th time, it arrives effortlessly. The pattern becomes self-sustaining, but awareness interrupts the chain. When you pause, when you notice, here is that feeling again, you break the automatic rhythm. You begin to hear the tone of your own mind. From that moment, you have a choice, to repeat the pattern or to play a different note. This is why mindfulness is at the heart of all spiritual training. Awareness doesn't erase karma, but it transforms how we relate to it. You can't stop the wind, but you can adjust your sails. When you watch your mind without judgment, its turbulence settles. The old resonances weaken, and the possibility of new harmony arises. The Tibetans expressed this idea through sound, through mantras. A mantra is not a plea to the universe, but a way of tuning the mind. Each repetition, spoken softly or silently, aligns the inner vibration with clarity. It is less a prayer and more a practice of resonance, like striking a pure note again and again until the surrounding noise begins to match it. In daily life, this can be as simple as breathing with intention. When you breathe slowly, your heartbeat follows, your nervous system settles, and the mind begins to resonate with calm. Over time, that calm becomes a familiar state, easier to find even amid chaos. This is karma in its gentlest form, the echo of peace teaching itself how to return. The Tibetans often said that karma is not a law of destiny, but of learning. Its purpose is not to bind us, but to reveal what we have yet to understand. When we react from pain, pain returns, not to punish, but to show the wound that still asks for care. When we act with love, love returns, not as a trophy, but as reflection. In this sense, karma is less a wheel turning endlessly, and more a song remembering its melody. Once you recognize the pattern, you can stop playing the dissonant notes. Awareness becomes the tuning key, and compassion becomes the melody that naturally follows. Try noticing this in small, quiet ways. When you offer someone patience instead of irritation, watch what happens in your body. There's a lightness, a small but real change in the atmosphere around you. When you forgive yourself for a mistake, feel how the inner space opens. That is resonance shifting. That is karma rewriting itself in real time. And what does this mean for the bardos? Everything. Because the resonance we cultivate in life becomes the vibration we carry into death. Every gentle act, every mindful breath, every choice to pause instead of react. All of it becomes the wind that will carry awareness to its next resting place. The Bardo Thödol tells us that liberation begins with recognition. When you hear your own tone clearly, you no longer confuse the echo for something external. You realize that the world is humming the same song, and that you're both musician and listener. So karma, in the end, is not a weight to bear, but a rhythm to dance with. And like any dance, when the steps become conscious, the motion turns graceful. From here, the story moves toward a quieter revelation, the possibility of stepping beyond the rhythm altogether. Just as a wheel stops turning when you stop pushing it, awareness, when fully recognized, can rest. That is the art of liberation, the still center within the spinning world. There comes a point in every rhythm when the music softens, when the repetition becomes so clear that you begin to hear the silence underneath it. In the language of the Bardo Thödol, this is the moment of liberation, the quiet recognition that the wheel can stop turning simply by not being pushed. Awareness, having followed its own echoes through countless forms, finally sees that it was never truly bound. The wheel spins because we keep feeding it motion. The instant we rest, it slows, then stills, then opens into peace. The Tibetans called this nirvana, though not as a distant paradise or place of reward. It is the natural state of mind freed from confusion, the mirror clear of dust, the sky unobstructed by clouds. The Tibetans described it as simple awareness, luminous and calm, in which all distinctions between life and death, heaven and hell, fade like ripples returning to the sea. To understand this softly, imagine a wheel made of light. Each spoke is a life, each rotation a new beginning. The wheel turns because it is touched by energy, the momentum of thought, desire, fear, and longing. Every action we take adds to its spin. But when awareness stops identifying with each spoke, when it no longer clings to the motion, it discovers that the centre of the wheel was never moving at all. The still point has always been there, watching the motion without being carried by it. That stillness is freedom. This realization doesn't mean rejecting life or fleeing from the world. It means participating fully but without attachment. Like a dancer who moves gracefully but knows the music will end, the awakened mind flows through experience without losing balance. It feels everything deeply: joy, loss, love, but remains grounded in the understanding that all things are waves upon the same sea. The Tibetans used a phrase for this: samsara and nirvana are one. Samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, is not a prison built by the universe. It's a motion built by the mind. When the mind awakens, the motion continues, but it no longer binds. The wheel still turns, but you are standing in the still centre, watching it move without fear. In modern language, we might call this psychological freedom. You no longer react out of habit, you respond from clarity. You're no longer dragged by emotions, you meet them, see through them, and let them pass. The world remains the same, but your relationship to it transforms. Pain may still come, but it no longer defines you. Pleasure still arises, but it no longer controls you. This is the peace that no circumstance can shake. The Tibetans illustrated this with another simple image: a flame in the wind. When the wind is strong, filled with desire, anger, or confusion, the flame flickers wildly. When the air becomes calm, the flame steadies and burns with a clear light. The flame doesn't vanish, it simply becomes itself. Awareness is the same. The moment we stop fanning the winds of craving and aversion, clarity reveals itself naturally. But what happens to those rare beings who awaken while still alive? Those who see the wheel clearly and understand how it turns. In Tibetan teaching, they are called bodhisattvas, those who have reached the threshold of liberation but choose to return out of compassion to help others still caught in the motion. They step back into the dream, knowing it is a dream, for the sake of love. A bodhisattva does not escape the world. They become the gentle presence within it, the teacher who speaks softly, the stranger who helps without reason, the friend who listens without judgment. They embody the truth that awakening is not withdrawal, but participation with understanding. Their compassion becomes the bridge between liberation and life, between the timeless and the temporary. This idea may sound exalted, but it's deeply human. Each of us, in small ways, can live like that. Every time you choose kindness when irritation would be easier, every time you forgive instead of retaliate, you're stepping into the path of the bodhisattva. You're practicing the art of returning consciously, living in the world without being bound by it. If we translate this to the rhythm of modern life, it becomes an inner experiment. Notice how attachment keeps the wheel spinning. You long for something, achieve it, enjoy it briefly, then reach for the next. The motion never stops. But in rare moments, perhaps during meditation, or when gazing at the ocean, or when watching a loved one sleep, you may feel the wheel pause. You're no longer chasing or fleeing, you're simply here. That stillness is the doorway out of the cycle. The Bardo Thödol doesn't present liberation as an escape to another world, but as a change of perception. The enlightened ones, it says, walk among us unnoticed because they see through the illusion of separation. For them, every sound is mantra, every person a reflection, every breath a reminder of the same clear light. Their freedom lies not in where they are, but in how they see. You could think of it as tuning an instrument so perfectly that even silence sounds like music. When awareness is tuned to compassion and clarity, the rhythm of the universe becomes harmony, not prison. The wheel doesn't vanish, it simply turns into a dance. And yet, even this understanding invites a question. If freedom lies in recognition, how do we prepare for it while we're still alive? How do we train the mind to remain calm amid the noise, to stay awake as the old habits spin? The Tibetans give a simple answer: by living consciously. Not by adding beliefs or rituals, but by practicing awareness in the small transitions of life. Because each of those transitions, each breath, each heartbeat, each change of emotion, is a rehearsal for the great transition at death. Every time you meet change with clarity instead of fear, the wheel slows a little. Every time you act from compassion instead of reaction, the center shines a little brighter. The truth of liberation, they said, is not hidden in monasteries or mountains. It's hidden in plain sight, in the spaces between your own breaths. The art is simply to notice, to pause long enough to feel the stillness that holds everything together. From here, our quiet exploration begins to fold gently back into the realm of living. For the Tibetans, the journey through death was always meant as a lesson for life. The next part of the path brings that lesson home, showing how every ending, every change, every moment of stillness can become a small rehearsal for awakening. From this point, the story turns homeward. The teachings that once described the passage through death now fold gently into the fabric of daily life. The Bardo Thödol was never only a manual for the dying, it was a guide for the living, a quiet invitation to practice awareness while breath still moves through the body. Its message is clear. Every moment of life is a small rehearsal for death, and every act of presence is a preparation for awakening. If you pause for a moment, you can feel this truth in something as simple as breathing. Each inhale is a birth, each exhale a letting go, and in the pause between them lies a tiny death. You cease, just for a second, and then begin again. That rhythm repeats tens of thousands of times each day, a continuous practice of creation and release. Most of the time we don't notice it, yet this is the most intimate bardo we live within. The space between breaths, the quiet witness of change. The Tibetans believe that the way we meet these small transitions determines how we will meet the great one. To live consciously is to train for death not through grimness or denial, but through intimacy with impermanence. Every ending, a conversation, a sunset, a cup of tea cooling on the table is a chance to practice letting go. And every beginning is a chance to awaken again. You can think of life as a series of bardos stitched together. The bardo of waking, the bardo of dreaming, the bardo of meditation, the bardo of love, even the bardo of silence. After laughter, each one is a threshold, a small transformation. When we pass through these with awareness, we're rehearsing for the final passage. This idea may sound abstract, but it is deeply practical. Mindfulness, the art of paying attention, becomes a bridge between life and death. It teaches us to remain awake as moments rise and fall, to meet them without fear. Each time you notice a thought appear and disappear, you are witnessing birth and death in miniature. Each time you watch a feeling arise and fade, you're learning that change is not destruction, it's renewal. Imagine sitting quietly at the end of a long day. You close your eyes, breathe softly, and begin to notice the small things, the weight of your body, the hum of distant sound, the echo of your heartbeat. At first, thoughts rush like water, lists, worries, fragments of memory. But if you simply watch them, they begin to slow. Between one thought and the next, there is space. That space is awareness itself. The Tibetans would call it the glimpse of the clear light, seen not at death, but in the living moment. This awareness is not cold or detached. It has warmth, a gentle quality of presence. When you meet someone's eyes and truly see them without agenda, that is awareness. When you stand under the night sky and feel wonder without needing to name it, that is awareness. It is not something we create. It is something we remember. To live consciously, then, is not to strive for perfection. It is to return, again and again, to that remembering. It means eating with attention, listening without rushing to reply, noticing the way sunlight touches the wall, or how rain sounds against the roof. Every moment holds an invitation to be fully present, and in that presence, the fear of endings begins to soften. The Tibetans often taught that the greatest preparation for death is gratitude. To be grateful is to acknowledge impermanence with an open heart. You appreciate something precisely because you know it will pass. The flower, the song, the face of someone you love, they are precious because they are fleeting. Gratitude turns impermanence into beauty. It transforms what could be loss into reverence. Even sleep, the most ordinary of experiences, is a teacher. Each night we let go of the world, surrendering to the unknown. In that surrender we practice trust, the same trust we will need when the body grows still. The Tibetan said that if you can fall asleep consciously, you're already halfway to dying well. Not because you force awareness to stay, but because you learn to relax into the unfolding. Modern science might describe this as training the brain's awareness networks, strengthening the ability to observe rather than react. But the essence is the same. When you live with mindfulness, you are teaching the nervous system and the soul to meet uncertainty with calm curiosity instead of fear. You're rehearsing the art of release in every breath. Sometimes the most powerful practice is simply to pause. Before answering a question, before making a decision, before stepping from one task to another, pause. Feel the moment stretching open like a small doorway. That doorway is the bardo. Awareness stands on the threshold, neither clinging to the past nor leaping to the future. Even a few seconds of presence like this can change the entire tone of your day. You might try this while walking. Feel the shift of weight from one foot to the other, the coolness of air on your skin, the small miracle of balance that keeps you upright. To walk mindfully is to remember that every step is both an ending and a beginning. Or while drinking water, notice its coolness, the way it fills and leaves the body. You're participating in the same flow that moves rivers and tides. Awareness of these simple things connects you to the rhythm of the universe, the same rhythm the Bardo Thödol describes on a cosmic scale. To live consciously is not to escape the ordinary, but to see the extraordinary within it. The miracle is not in distant heavens, it's in the present breath, in the heartbeat that continues without being asked, in the mind that can notice itself thinking. When you begin to see life this way, fear loosens its grip. Death ceases to be an interruption. It becomes a continuation of the same mystery, one you have already been practicing to meet. Each time you notice change without fear, you're learning to die a little wiser. Each moment of awareness plants a seed of clarity that will flower in the bardos. The Tibetans believe that if you train your mind to stay awake in the small deaths of everyday life, the end of a breath, the fading of a thought, you will recognize the great death not as an ending, but as awakening. And perhaps that is the quiet secret of the Bardo Thödol, that we don't wait for the final moment to awaken. We do it now, in the midst of life, in the pauses, in the breath, in the tiny disappearances that teach us how to let go. From here, our journey naturally deepens into the practices that make this awareness more stable. Mindfulness, compassion, and mantra become the instruments through which we remember the clear light more easily, even in the noise of the living world. These are not exotic techniques. They are simple ways of living fully awake. And so, the next part of our story will explore how we can train the mind gently, so that when the final moment arrives, we will recognize it not as darkness, but as light we already know. The Tibetan masters used to say that if you can learn to stay present for a single breath, you can learn to meet eternity. Mindfulness was their word for this art, the gentle practice of resting in what is without chasing or resisting. It is the simplest of all teachings, and yet it contains the heart of everything the Bardo Thödol describes. The same awareness that watches a breath rise and fall is the awareness that will one day watch the body rise and fall for the last time. To know it now is to recognize the clear light before the moment of death. Mindfulness, in its purest form, is the act of coming home. It is a remembering of presence, a return from distraction to the steady rhythm of being. When you sit quietly and notice the breath entering and leaving the body, you are watching the miniature version of life and death, over and over. Each inhale creates, each exhale releases, and each pause between them is the stillness that holds both. That pause is awareness, the space between moments where nothing is missing. In monasteries high in the Himalayas, monks begin each day with this simple practice. They sit facing the rising light and listen to their own breathing. Some count the breaths to steady the mind, others simply observe the movement. What they discover is that thoughts continue to flow like clouds, but awareness itself does not move. It is like the sky, vast and quiet, allowing everything yet belonging to nothing. You don't need mountains or robes to find this stillness. You can practice it in the small, ordinary places of your life, waiting in line, sitting in traffic, sipping morning coffee. Just feel the breath enter, feel it leave, and notice the space it creates. Awareness begins to reveal itself not as something distant or sacred, but as the ground beneath all experience. In our modern world, we often treat mindfulness as a technique for stress relief, something to quiet the nerves or sharpen focus. But in the Tibetan view, it is much more profound. It is a way of seeing. It teaches that the world you perceive is not separate from the awareness perceiving it. Each sound, each sensation, each thought appears within the same luminous field. When you rest in that field, even for a moment, fear loses its weight. Think of a time when you were completely absorbed in what you were doing, watching a sunset, listening to rain, or holding someone's hand. The usual chatter of the mind fell away, and there was only presence. In that moment, you were not analysing life. You were living it directly. That state is mindfulness. It isn't concentration or effort. It's surrender. A quiet recognition that awareness is already here, waiting to be noticed. The Tibetans often spoke of awareness and thought as water and waves. The waves rise and fall endlessly, but the water remains the same. When we identify only with the waves, life feels chaotic, full of ups and downs. But when we begin to sense ourselves as the water, the changes on the surface no longer disturb the depth. Mindfulness invites us to feel that depth again and again until it becomes natural. Every mindful breath is a small act of liberation. It's a pause in the momentum of habit. When you watch your mind with curiosity instead of judgment, you step out of the wheel of reaction. Anger still arises, but you see it as heat passing through the body. Fear still comes, but you recognize it as energy, not identity. This recognition loosens karma in the gentlest way. It allows the old resonances to play out without creating new ones. Even science, with its instruments and measurements, has begun to glimpse this power. Neuroscientists studying long-term meditators have found that mindfulness reshapes the brain, softening the networks of fear, strengthening the regions of empathy. Yet beyond all studies and graphs lies something the instruments cannot touch: the direct experience of stillness. When awareness turns inward and rests upon itself, a profound quiet opens, like a lake reflecting the sky. The Bardo Thödol teaches that this same quiet is what dawns as the clear light after death. To train in mindfulness is to rehearse recognition. Each time you notice awareness watching thought, you are glimpsing the mind's true nature. The Tibetans call this recognition of Rigpa, the awareness that knows itself as awareness. It isn't something to force. It happens naturally when we stop chasing the next moment. You might begin this practice by simply noticing sound. Close your eyes and listen, not to identify, but to receive. The hum of a refrigerator, a distant car, a bird, your own breathing. They all rise from silence and return to it. That silence is not emptiness. It's the same awareness that will greet you in the bardos. When you learn to rest there now, you are preparing to recognize it later. Mindfulness doesn't remove difficulty, it transforms how we meet it. When sadness appears, instead of drowning, you observe. You feel the weight in your chest, the heaviness in your breath. You name it softly. This is sadness. The naming brings space, and in that space, compassion naturally arises. You realize that sadness is not an enemy. It's weather passing through the open sky of mind. In this way, mindfulness and compassion grow together. As awareness expands, judgment softens. You begin to see that everyone, including yourself, is moved by forces they barely understand. That recognition brings gentleness. The Tibetans would say that mindfulness is the seed and compassion is its flower. When you practice awareness, kindness blooms naturally. Even moments of boredom can become doorways. Instead of reaching for distraction, stay. Feel the restlessness, the urge to escape, and watch it move. Beneath the discomfort, there's a subtle sweetness. The realization that awareness itself is never bored. It doesn't need entertainment. It simply witnesses. That witnessing is the same presence that watches life and death unfold without preference. The beauty of mindfulness is its simplicity. It doesn't demand belief or ritual. It only asks that you be here, now, with what is. The breath, the sound, the heartbeat, the flicker of light on a wall. Each is enough. Through them, the eternal reveals itself in the ordinary, and as this recognition deepens, something extraordinary happens. The boundary between meditation and life begins to dissolve. You realize you can practice awareness anywhere, while washing dishes, walking under trees, even while speaking with someone you love. Every act becomes sacred because it is seen. Every breath, the Tibetan said, is a rehearsal for letting go. You breathe in, the world enters. You breathe out, the world leaves. To live with that awareness is to live consciously, courageously, and kindly. It is to train the mind to meet every ending with the same calm acceptance you are practicing right now. From here, the teachings begin to turn toward the heart, for awareness without compassion is only half awake. The next practice, called Tonglen, teaches how to breathe not just for yourself but for others, to draw in their pain, to release comfort, and to transform suffering into love. It is mindfulness extended outward, the art of turning awareness into kindness. If mindfulness is the art of awareness, then Tonglen is the art of connection. The word itself means sending and receiving, and it describes a practice as simple as breathing, yet as vast as love. Where mindfulness trains us to see clearly, Tonglen teaches us to feel deeply, to open the boundaries of self, and dissolve the illusion that our suffering and the suffering of others are separate. The practice begins with the breath, just as mindfulness does. You sit quietly and bring to mind someone who is struggling. It might be a friend in pain, a stranger you've seen, or even yourself. You breathe in, imagining that you are drawing in their pain, their confusion, their heaviness, not to be burdened by it, but to transform it. Then you breathe out, sending back light, comfort, peace. Inhale suffering, exhale love. Inhale darkness, exhale light. At first, the mind resists. It feels unnatural to breathe in what is unpleasant. We are conditioned to avoid discomfort, to push it away. But the paradox of Tonglen is that in embracing what we fear, it loses its power. When you breathe in suffering with compassion, you are not absorbing pain. You're acknowledging it, meeting it, holding it in the vast space of awareness where it begins to dissolve. The Tibetans compared this to opening a window in a crowded room. The stale air rushes out, fresh air rushes in, and the space feels lighter. The breath becomes an instrument of transformation. Pain is not rejected. It is transmuted into empathy. Fear becomes tenderness. Sorrow becomes strength. You can practice Tonglen anywhere, even in the middle of your day. When you see someone arguing on the street, breathe in their anger, breathe out calm. When you hear news of suffering in the world, breathe it in and breathe out peace. When you notice your own frustration rising, breathe it in gently and breathe out understanding for yourself and everyone else who has ever felt the same way. The magic of this practice lies not in metaphysical mechanics, but in the softening of the heart. Each time you take in, suffering willingly, you remind yourself that you're vast enough to hold it. The self, which once seemed so fragile and separate, begins to expand. You start to feel connected to the great web of life, not as a concept, but as an experience. In the Bardo Thödol, this compassion is described as the ultimate protection in the bardos. It says that fear cannot harm the one who meets it with love. The wrathful beings, the dazzling visions, the pull of rebirth, all are softened when the heart opens. Compassion becomes a kind of armour, not made of steel but of tenderness, transparent and indestructible. Imagine a candle flame surrounded by wind. If it fights the wind, it flickers wildly. If it relaxes into it, it burns steadily. Compassion is that steadiness. It doesn't try to control what comes, it simply meets everything with warmth. Modern psychology might describe Tonglen as an advanced form of empathy training. Studies show that when people imagine sharing another's suffering with kindness rather than avoidance, the brain's fear centers quiet down while the circuits of connection light up. In simple terms, compassion replaces fear with presence. But long before science measured brainwaves, the Tibetans knew this through experience. They called it the alchemy of the heart. There is something deeply soothing about this practice when you truly let it unfold. You begin to realize that suffering itself is not an enemy. It is a messenger. It shows where love is needed. When you breathe it in without resistance, you become the space through which healing can move. You can start very small. Begin by breathing with your own pain. When a difficult emotion arises, grief, anger, shame, don't push it away. Breathe it in gently, let it fill your awareness for a moment, then breathe out softness, forgiveness, and understanding for yourself. Feel how the tension eases, how space opens inside you. That's Tonglen. Once you've done it for yourself, you can do it for others. The Tibetans often used imagery to guide this practice. They would imagine breathing in black smoke, the symbol of pain, and breathing out white light. But the smoke is not poison. It's the condensed energy of suffering ready to be transformed. The light is not fantasy. It's the radiance of compassion emerging naturally from awareness. You don't need to believe in mystical forces to understand this. Anyone who has ever comforted another person knows that sharing pain often lightens it. Tonglen simply turns that act inward and outward through the rhythm of the breath. The beauty of this method is that it turns ordinary breathing into service. Each inhale becomes an act of courage. Each exhale becomes an offering. You're no longer breathing just for yourself. You're breathing for the world. The boundaries between I and you begin to blur. Compassion becomes something physical, woven into every breath, every heartbeat. There's a story of a great Lama who practiced Tonglen through a long illness. When asked how he endured the pain, he said, Each time it comes, I breathe it in and think of everyone in the world who feels the same pain. Then I breathe out, sending them comfort. The pain no longer belongs to me alone. That is the essence of the practice, transforming personal suffering into shared strength. And in this sharing lies liberation. The Bardo Thödol says that compassion is the bridge across all bardos. Even when clarity fades, compassion remains. It's the thread that guides consciousness through darkness, reminding it of its true nature. Love, in this teaching, is not an emotion, but an orientation. The mind turning toward connection instead of isolation. In your daily life, this can become a quiet habit. When you wake up, you can dedicate your first few breaths to someone who needs peace. When you lie down at night, you can breathe in the weariness of the world and breathe out rest for all who can't sleep. These gestures might seem small, but they shift something fundamental inside. You begin to live less as a separate being, and more as part of a great breathing whole. Tonglen teaches that compassion is not a burden but a release. It doesn't deplete you, it expands you. The more you give, the more space you discover within. That space is awareness itself, boundless and kind. And so, in the end, this practice becomes effortless. You no longer have to imagine taking and sending. The breath itself begins to carry the rhythm of compassion, naturally balancing the currents of life. From here, the journey turns to sound, the subtle vibration of the mind itself. The Tibetans believed that just as breath can carry love, sound can carry clarity. The repetition of sacred syllables called mantra becomes a kind of lullaby for the soul. Together with phowa, the art of consciously directing awareness at the moment of death, it completes the training of the heart and mind. If mindfulness is the practice of awareness, and Tonglen is the practice of compassion, then mantra and phowa are the practices of remembrance. They are the final notes of the Tibetan symphony of awakening, the way to steady consciousness when everything else falls away. Both are bridges, one built of sound, the other of trust. Let's begin with mantra, a word that means mind protection. At first glance it seems simple, a repeated phrase, a rhythm of sound. But the Tibetans understood sound not just as noise, but as vibration. Everything in the universe, they said, hums with energy. Mountains hum, rivers hum, even light hums, though we cannot hear it. When we speak a mantra, we are tuning the instrument of the mind to the same vibration as clarity itself. Think of it as humming a note that slowly aligns the body and mind into harmony. You could say that mantra is the music of consciousness remembering its true tone. When repeated with awareness, it becomes more than words. It becomes resonance. The Tibetans compared it to a lullaby that calms the restless winds of thought. One of the most familiar mantras in Tibetan Buddhism is Om Mani Padme Hum. It is often translated as the jewel is in the lotus, though its meaning is far more poetic than literal. The jewel represents wisdom, the lotus compassion. Together they describe the union of clarity and love, the essence of awakening. When this mantra is whispered slowly, it is not about belief, it is about rhythm, breath, and feeling. Each syllable becomes a wave rising and falling in awareness. You might try it yourself, not as a ritual, but as an experiment. Breathe softly and let the syllables move like wind through water. Om Mani Padme Hum. Say it not with effort, but with tenderness, as though the sound were carrying your mind back home. If you prefer, you can use another phrase, even a simple one like peace or thank you. The power is not in the language, it's in the intention. The repetition becomes a cradle, rocking the mind into stillness. The Tibetans said that mantra can accompany consciousness through the bardos like a melody that never stops. Even when the body sleeps, even when senses fade, the rhythm continues. It becomes a lifeline, reminding awareness of its true nature when confusion or fear arise. In this way, Mantra is not prayer, it is remembrance. It keeps the vibration of clarity alive through every transition. Modern science, in its own quiet way, has found reflections of this truth. Researchers studying rhythmic chanting have observed that it slows the heartbeat, synchronizes breathing, and gently lowers the activity of the brain's restless centers. In plain words, it harmonizes the system. But beyond the measurable effects lies something science cannot chart: the way the repetition carries you beyond thought. When the words fade into sound and the sound fades into silence, only awareness remains. The Tibetans love to describe that silence as the pure note of being, the one sound that underlies all other sounds. They said that if you listen deeply enough, you can hear it everywhere. In the rustling of trees, in the hum of electricity, even in your own breath. The universe itself is chanting. We're simply remembering the rhythm. The second practice, phowa, is more mysterious, though its essence is also simple. The word means transference of consciousness. It is a meditation used at the moment of death, a way of guiding awareness deliberately toward freedom. While mantra anchors the mind through vibration, phowa directs it through intention. Imagine the consciousness as a beam of light. In ordinary life, that light is scattered, shining on this thought, that emotion, this fear. Phowa gathers the light into a single ray and points it toward liberation. It is not about control, but about release, like an arrow flying toward the open sky. During this practice, the dying person, or someone assisting them, visualizes the consciousness rising upward through the crown of the head toward a field of radiant light. The Lama whispers gentle instructions. Let go of the body. Let go of the past. Let the mind rise like smoke into the clear air. This is not an escape, but a return. Awareness is guided back to the same clear light that appeared at the first moment of death. The same light glimpsed in deep meditation. The same awareness that has been with us all along. The Tibetans often practiced phowa throughout life, not because they were preoccupied with death, but because they wanted to be ready for it. They treated death as a great journey and believed that just as travellers prepare their path, so too should the mind prepare its direction. Practicing phowa while alive is like studying the stars before setting sail. You learn to recognise the constellations that will guide you home. You don't have to believe in literal transference to feel the essence of this teaching. Every time you let go of a thought gently, you are practicing phowa in miniature. Each time you forgive, release or surrender something you once clung to, you are guiding awareness toward freedom. The gesture is the same, turning the mind upward, away from contraction and towards spaciousness. There's a soft courage in this. Phowa asks you to trust that awareness does not end when the familiar does. It invites you to aim your final breath not at fear, but at light. That act of trust, they said, is enough to carry consciousness beyond confusion. Both mantra and phowa share a single heart. Faith in awareness itself. Not blind faith, but experiential faith. The kind that comes from glimpsing peace during practice, from feeling the stillness beneath sound. The Tibetans called this the path of remembrance. Everything you've practiced, mindfulness, compassion, clarity, comes together here, woven into the final moment of letting go. In that sense, these practices are not about preparing for something later. They are ways of living now. You can chant softly while washing dishes, walk with a sense of upward openness, breathe with the memory of light. Every act becomes a quiet rehearsal, each breath a thread connecting life and eternity. And so the cycle of training completes itself. Mindfulness teaches us to see. Tonglen teaches us to feel. Mantra teaches us to remember. Phowa teaches us to release. Together they form the complete arc of awakening, a preparation not for death, but for living consciously in every moment. The Tibetans sometimes describe the entire journey as a song. the soul singing itself back into harmony with the cosmos. The verses begin with birth, rise through love and loss, crescendo at death, and dissolve into silence. But that silence is not an ending. It is the rest between notes, the stillness that gives meaning to the melody. In truth, every mindful breath, every kind thought, every moment of letting go is already phowa, a transference of consciousness from confusion to clarity, from fear to freedom. You don't have to wait for your final breath to begin that journey. You are already in it right now, breathing in rhythm with the universe. As the teachings quiet, we begin to lift our gaze toward modern understanding, the ways in which ancient insight and contemporary science now meet, each describing the same vast mystery from opposite shores. As our journey draws near its final stretch, the paths of mysticism and science begin to converge like two rivers meeting at dusk. The Bardo Thödol was written in a world of monasteries, prayer flags, and high Himalayan skies. Its language is symbolic, woven from light and sound and compassion. And yet, centuries later, scientists peering into the mysteries of the brain and consciousness find themselves describing, in their own way, many of the same landscapes. The vocabulary has changed, but the wonder remains the same. The Tibetans spoke of awareness as a clear light that outlives the body. Neuroscientists studying near-death experiences now record reports of people whose hearts have stopped for minutes, yet who later describe awareness continuing, floating above the operating table, moving through darkness toward radiant brilliance. Some tell of hearing a hum or vibration, others of being enveloped in a boundless peace. When asked what it felt like, many say, it was more real than real. Science does not confirm the survival of consciousness beyond death, but it has learned to listen. The instruments detect the fading patterns of brain activity, the cascades of neurochemicals, the bursts of light within the neurons. Yet even as they measure, they admit something humbling. No scan can find the moment when awareness disappears. It fades gradually, like the last glow of twilight, but there is no clear line between presence and absence. In that mystery, the old Tibetan idea lingers. Perhaps awareness does not belong to the brain alone, but flows through it like music through an instrument. The Tibetans would smile gently at such a thought. For them, the body was a vessel, the mind its song. Death was not silence. It was the moment when the melody leaves the instrument and continues in the air. Modern physics, too, offers echoes of this vision. Scientists speak of energy that never dies, only changes form. Matter dissolves into particles, particles into vibrations. The universe hums on, endlessly transforming. To a Tibetan Lama, this would sound familiar. The Bardo Thödol describes consciousness doing the same, transforming, flowing, shifting through bardos as energy does through space. Where science sees the conservation of energy, Buddhism sees the continuity of awareness. Both describe a cosmos that wastes nothing. The difference lies only in language. Science measures waves. Wisdom describes the ocean. One speaks in data, the other in metaphor. But both approach the same horizon, the mystery of what it means to be aware. In laboratories around the world, researchers now study mindfulness, compassion, and the effects of meditation on the brain. The findings are remarkable, but unsurprising to those who have practiced for centuries. Long-term meditators show decreased activity in the regions associated with fear and increased coherence in the regions linked with empathy and insight. In simpler words, the brain learns peace. The patterns of calm built through mindfulness become its new default rhythm. Science calls this neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to change itself. The Tibetans might call it karma ripening into wisdom. Both agree. What you practice, you become. Every repetition of awareness shapes the structure of the mind, whether in neurons or in consciousness itself. Even the modern understanding of dreams has begun to echo ancient teachings. researchers exploring lucid dreaming, the ability to awaken within sleep, describe it as a training ground for awareness, not unlike the Bardo states described in the Bardo Thödol. During lucid dreams, the brain shows hybrid activity between waking and sleeping states, as if the dreamer has one foot in two worlds. The Tibetans use this as metaphor. If you can stay conscious in a dream, you can stay conscious in death. Awareness becomes the thread that connects every realm. Perhaps what binds science and spirituality most deeply is their shared humility before the unknown. The more closely we look at the fabric of reality, the more it seems to shimmer, resisting full comprehension. Quantum physicists speak of particles that exist in multiple places at once, changing when observed. Neuroscientists confess that the mystery of subjective experience, what it feels like to be aware, remains unsolved. The Tibetans would simply nod and say, yes, awareness cannot see itself, but it can awaken to its nature. For centuries, the Bardo Thödol has served as a map for travellers between worlds. Science, in its own way, is building another map, through microscopes, telescopes, and equations translated into colour and light. But both maps point toward the same destination, understanding what we truly are. When the two perspectives meet, something beautiful happens. The mythic becomes practical, the measurable becomes sacred. A doctor monitoring brainwaves and a monk watching the breath are both observing the same miracle, the dance of life and awareness. One studies the patterns, the other studies the space between them. To combine the two is to see the full picture. Science grounds us in reality. Wisdom reminds us that reality has depth. Science teaches us to ask questions. Wisdom teaches us to listen. And when both walk together, knowledge becomes awe. You can feel this convergence in your own experience. When you pause to observe a thought arising, you're doing neuroscience and mysticism at once. You're watching electrical signals in the brain and waves in the ocean of mind. You're both subject and scientist, both instrument and melody. This union, the observer and the observed, has always been the hidden bridge between reason and reverence. In this meeting of the worlds, neither side needs to dominate the other. The language of measurement and the language of metaphor can coexist peacefully. Science helps us understand how awareness appears. Spirituality helps us understand why it matters. Both, when practiced sincerely, lead to humility, the quiet acknowledgement that life itself is an unsolved miracle. And perhaps that is what the Bardo Thödol was whispering all along, that mystery is not a problem to solve, but a field to rest in. The scientists call it the unknown, the Tibetans call it the clear light. Both are pointing to the same horizon of wonder, where the mind finally stops trying to capture truth and simply lets it be. So as our exploration nears its end, the message of both science and spirit begins to harmonize into one song. Awareness is vast, the universe is alive, and every breath is an experiment in both living and understanding. The instruments of science and the prayers of wisdom are simply two hands touching the same mystery from opposite sides. From here, the story carries us to its gentle close, to the final reflection that death itself is not a shadow, but a teacher. The Tibetans called it the Great Mirror, the one moment that shows us what it truly means to live. And so, we arrive at the quiet edge of our journey, the same edge every human being will one day meet. We began this exploration asking what happens when we die, and now, after walking through the bardos, after breathing with awareness, after listening to the music of mind and matter, we discover that the answer has been with us all along. Death is not the end of the story. It is the teacher of life itself. To understand this teaching is not to chase mystery, but to live it. Death reminds us, gently but firmly, that every moment is unrepeatable. It asks us to pay attention to the sound of the wind in the trees, to the warmth of another person's hand, to the feeling of the sun against the skin. It whispers, do not postpone awareness. Everything you love is temporary and therefore infinitely precious. The Tibetans called death the great mirror because it shows us who we really are. In its reflection, all illusions fall away: status, possessions, beliefs, the small stories we build to keep fear at bay. What remains is awareness itself, luminous and vast. To see this before death comes is the greatest gift. It turns life into a practice, a long preparation for awakening. Think for a moment about how the world looks when you realize its impermanence. The things that once seemed ordinary suddenly glow with quiet beauty. The cup in your hand, fragile and warm, the evening light falling through the window. Even a moment of silence becomes sacred because you know it will never happen in quite the same way again. Awareness sharpens, not with urgency, but with tenderness. The Bardo Thödol teaches that to face death is to learn how to live. The same courage that allows consciousness to meet the clear light can be practiced right now, each time we meet change. When a relationship ends, when a season turns, when we lose something we thought we needed, those are the small rehearsals. Each one asks, can you let go with grace? Can you see what remains when everything else fades? In that sense, death is not our enemy. Forgetfulness is. Forgetting that we are impermanent makes us anxious and distracted. Remembering it brings us back to presence. The Tibetans did not meditate on death to invite sadness, but to dissolve fear. They understood that when you accept impermanence deeply, what remains is gratitude. Modern science, too, has begun to glimpse this paradox. Studies on people who've had near-death experiences often report the same transformation afterward. They live with less fear, less greed, and more love. They describe life as more vivid, more immediate. It's as if touching the edge of death sharpens their sense of being alive. The Bardo Thödol would call this the blessing of the mirror, seeing through death into the essence of life. If we translate this into simple language, it means learning to live awake, to know that time is fragile and that awareness is the one thing that gives meaning to it. You can feel this in the smallest moments. When you stop scrolling through noise and listen to your own breathing. When you look at someone you care for and realize that someday both of you will be memories. And that makes this moment radiant. When you forgive, because holding resentment feels suddenly absurd in the face of impermanence. Death teaches us proportion. It reminds us how brief and miraculous it is to have a heartbeat at all. It makes patience easier, compassion deeper. You begin to see that everyone you meet is carrying their own bardo, loss, fear, longing, and that softens the edges of judgment. The awareness that we are all temporary turns rivalry into empathy, and empathy into peace. In the Tibetan tradition, lamas sometimes meditate in graveyards or charnel grounds. They do not do this out of morbid fascination, but to remember truth. They sit among reminders of mortality until fear dissolves and only tenderness remains. We are all travellers, they say, resting for a while in the same inn. When you see life like that, the boundaries between beginning and end blur. Every encounter becomes a meeting at a crossroad of time, brief but meaningful. You don't need a monastery to practice this. Every sunset, every aging photograph, every moment of change is a small invitation to awareness. The practice is to accept the invitation, to look directly at what is fleeting and say, "Thank you." Gratitude in this sense is not just politeness. It is enlightenment in ordinary clothes. It is the recognition that every breath is borrowed and every heartbeat a gift. If you live this way, death no longer feels like an interruption. It becomes a continuation of the same rhythm you've practiced all your life, the rhythm of letting go. You inhale, life fills you. You exhale, you return it to the world. And in the pause between the two, there is peace. That pause is what the Bardo Thödol calls the clear light, the awareness that outlives form. The scientists studying consciousness might describe this as continuity of information, or as patterns of energy persisting beyond the decay of matter. The mystics would smile and say, yes, that's another way of saying the same thing. Both are pointing to what cannot be fully named. The simple fact that something within us witnesses all change but does not change itself, and perhaps that is the greatest comfort. If awareness truly continues, then death is not disappearance, but transformation. If it does not, then this single, brief moment of consciousness is even more precious. Either way, the message is the same. Live fully. Notice the small miracles. Speak gently. Forgive often. Breathe with wonder. The Bardo Thödol ends with a reminder that applies as much to life as to death. Do not be afraid. Whatever you see, know it as your own mind. That phrase can carry you through anything. Grief, confusion, endings, even the unknown itself. The world outside and the world inside are reflections in the same mirror. To meet both with awareness is to be free. So as this journey closes, take a moment to feel the stillness around you. The mind that has been listening to these words is the same mind that will one day meet silence. Between now and then, everything is practice. Every breath, every act of kindness, every moment of clarity polishes the mirror of awareness until it shines with its original light. And if tonight you close your eyes and drift into sleep, remember that sleep too is a bardo, a small rehearsal for the great letting go. You are safe in that passage. You are carried by the same awareness that has carried you since birth. Let the day dissolve. Let the body rest. Let the mind expand into quiet. The journey continues softly, endlessly. Thank you for being part of this exploration, this gentle meeting of science, spirit, and the mystery that holds them both. May you move through your bardos, both waking and dreaming, with peace, clarity, and compassion. And when you're ready, may you sleep peacefully, voyager of the infinite mind.